The prairie wind tasted of ash that morning, sharp, acrid, and heavy with a promise of ruin. Where the wagon train had once crawled westward like a determined insect, now only wreckage remained, torn canvas flapping in the wind, splintered wheels half buried in churned mud. And the bruised hush of the dead left where they fell. They should have known better than to linger near the shallow bend of Dry Creek. Word always traveled about the Painted Horse Gang, how they struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. But warnings meant little to people desperate enough to chase a patch of land they'd never see dot in the aftermath. The survivors were few. And among the few, there was only one who could not run. Her name was Sorella Callahan, but nobody had said her name out loud since the shooting started. She sat propped against the charred remains of a wagon, a hand pressed to the curve of her belly. The baby shifted under her palm, a stubborn flutter of life, in a place where death had taken everything else. She should have been crying, or screaming, or even praying. But grief had its own strange alchemy when blood dried stiff in your hair and the last face you loved lay, half buried by windblown grit. Grief turned to stone, and Sorella's tears turned to salt long before the first vulture's shadow crossed her boots. When the hoofbeats came, they came soft at first, a distant drumbeat that might have been another storm. But storms did not breathe, nor did they watch you from the saddle with eyes like obsidian and shoulders painted with the colors of the wind. The man who rode into the ruin that morning called himself Mato. In the Lakota tongue it meant bear, and when Sorella lifted her eyes to meet him, she understood why. His hair was bound with sinew and beads that caught the light like small prayers. He carried a long rifle across his back, but it was the old scar along his jaw pale as a river of bone that marked him more deeply than any weapon ever could. Mato dismounted slow, like he did not wish to frighten her. She was too far gone to be afraid of men. If fear had come for her, it would have found her long before the last gunshot echoed off the bluffs. He said something in his language gentle, like wind in tall grass. She did not answer. Her throat felt made of dust. When he crouched, his shadow fell over her, blocking out the harsh glare of the noon sun. "Woman," he said in halting English, "where are your people?" Sorella's dry lips cracked as she forced a whisper past them. "Gone." He glanced past her, past the scorched wagons, the dead mules, the flies already swarming the wagon captain's chest. "You carry a child?" It felt like an accusation. She pressed her palm harder to her belly. "Yes," a long silence stretched between them. The prairie spoke in the hush of wind and the quiet moan of warped wheels. Mato's eyes moved to the horizon, where thunderheads threatened to break the world open. "Come," he said at last, extending a hand. It was scarred and calloused, strong enough to crack a man's spine, but soft as a promise as it hovered in front of her. "You die here, or you live. I protect you, I swear." She wanted to laugh. The sound got lost somewhere in her throat. "Why?" His mouth twitched a flicker of amusement that did not reach the iron in his gaze. "Because the wind does not choose where the seed falls. It just carries it." When she did not take his hand, he did not withdraw it. He waited motionless as stone until she found enough strength to lift her own. Her fingers trembled when they closed around his dot. The world tilted as he hoisted her to her feet. Pain rippled through her hips, her legs. Every step away from the massacre felt like a betrayal of those who could not stand again. They left Dry Creek behind them. The ghosts watched them go, eyes empty as bullet holes. And the wind rose carrying the scent of ash and hope in equal measure. Night fell like a blanket woven from every shadow that had ever touched Sorella's skin. They camped beneath the shelter of a sandstone bluff, the fire pit hidden by boulders and brush. Mato's horse grazed nearby, patient and unbothered by the scent of blood still crusted in the hem of Sorella's dress. She did not sleep. Sleep was for people who trusted tomorrow to come gently. Instead, she sat with her back against the bluff, her knees drawn up, a thin blanket draped around her shoulders. Mato sat across from her, sharpening a blade that looked older than the prairie itself. She studied him in silence. The lines of his face were carved deep by wind and time, older than she had first guessed, but not old enough to seem distant. He caught her watching and paused his work, one brow lifting. "You look like you have questions." "I have too many," she said hoarsely. "But they're heavy, and I don't have room to carry them tonight." Mato nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he carried questions too, ones that had no words in either of their tongues. When she shifted, a bolt of pain lanced through her lower back. She winced, curling her hand protectively over her belly. The baby stirred just a flutter, but enough to remind her that she was not alone in the prison of her skin. Mato watched, eyes narrowing. "Your time comes soon?" She forced a breath, past the knot in her chest. "I don't know. Maybe. I thought I'd have a wagon, a bed, a midwife." "Not." Her eyes flicked to the darkness beyond the fire's glow. "Not this." He said nothing. He set aside his knife, reached into a leather pouch, and drew out a handful of dried herbs. He crumbled them into a tin cup, poured hot water from the small kettle. The scent that rose sharp, earthy, reminded her of meadows she'd never see again. When he offered it, she hesitated. Mato tilted his head, patient as ever. "It helps pain and fear." She took it with both hands. The warmth bled into her fingers, into the deep ache that lived beneath her ribs. She drank, and the bitter taste chased some of the numbness from her tongue. "You have family?" she asked, voice muffled against the rim of the cup. His eyes drifted to the stars overhead. They glittered like distant eyes. Once. His nod was slight but final. The wind carried them. "Now it carries me." They sat in silence after that, two broken people, bound by the stubborn thread of a promise neither had asked for. The fire cracked and hissed. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to one another across the open plains. Sorella wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. "Will you really protect me?" Mato's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, even if it costs you everything." He looked at her, then really looked, and something like an echo of grief flickered through his eyes. "It already has. This is what remains. A promise kept." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the wind could change direction, that tomorrow might come wrapped in something softer than smoke and gunpowder. But deep down, she knew that some promises demanded everything a soul could bear and more. When the wind shifted near dawn, Sorella dreamed she heard voices carried on at her mother's, her father's, all those who lay dead along Dry Creek. They did not blame her. They did not forgive her. They simply waited. And so did she, sitting in the cold ashes of yesterday, her hand pressed to the fragile drumbeat of life that had survived the storm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The hush before dawn gave the world a brittle stillness, the kind that made every breath feel borrowed. Sorella's eyelids fluttered open before the first rays of sunlight touched the sandstone bluff. She shifted, careful not to wake Mato, who sat cross-legged with his back against a boulder, chin tucked to his chest in restless sleep. The embers had burned low, but a thin wisp of smoke rose from the heart of the fire pit. She shivered. Her old traveling coat, once fine blue wool lined with mother's careful stitches, was torn at the sleeve and crusted at the hem with dried blood. She tugged it tighter around her shoulders, hoping the baby could feel the warmth she could not find in her own bones. A low grunt made her flinch. Mato stirred, eyes snapping open as if they'd never really closed. He glanced at the fire, then at her. His voice was low, rough with sleep but steady. "Cold?" She gave a small nod. The truth was more complicated. She was cold, but she was also afraid of the memories curling at the edges of her mind, and of the ache beneath her ribs that pulsed with every shallow breath. Mato rose without another word. He stepped away from the camp, returning moments later with more kindling, a dead branch, splinters of sagebrush. He set to work feeding the fire, coaxing small flames to life. Sparks danced like fireflies in the half-light. Sorella studied his hands as he worked. They were broad and scarred, but each movement was deliberate, almost gentle. How could hands that had likely broken bones and loosed arrows into men's backs now build something so small and fragile as a fire for her? "Your dreams, Mato," said suddenly, not looking at her. "They troubled you." She stiffened. "How do you know?" His eyes flicked to hers, dark and still. "You speak in your sleep." She hugged her knees tighter. The words she remembered were tangled fragments, her mother's lullabies, her father's booming laugh before it turned to a gurgle in the dirt, the sound of her husband's voice. As he shouted her name the moment before the bullet found his throat, she forced herself to meet Mato's gaze. "I dream of Dry Creek, and of before. Dreams are just spirits reminding you you're still alive." He tossed another stick into the fire. The dead have nothing left to say. His certainty should have comforted her. Instead it scraped. Something raw inside her. She wanted the dead to speak. She wanted her mother's blessing, her father's forgiveness. She wanted her husband's promise that she'd done enough surviving when she could have laid down beside him. The fire crackled and spat resin. Sorella winced at a sudden jab of pain low in her belly. She sucked in a breath, pressing her palm to the swell beneath her coat. Mato's attention snapped to her. He moved closer, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. "The child?" She gritted her teeth as the pain ebbed. "It's early still." "I don't think." Another jolt silenced her protest. It felt like the prairie itself shifting beneath her bones. Mato stood abruptly. He went to his horse, rummaging through one of the worn saddlebags, and returned with a rolled blanket and a small pouch of dried roots. He poured water into the battered tin cup, dropping in a pinch of crushed herbs. "You drink," he ordered. "Helps with pain, helps make you strong." She took the cup in shaking hands. The bitter brew smelled of wet earth and something sharper, like a storm waiting to break. She sipped, feeling the warmth coil through her ribs and settle deep in. Her belly. Mato sat beside her, not touching, but close enough she could feel the heat of him. She wanted to tell him he could leave, that she'd be fine, that she didn't need a stranger's promise to bind her to this world when everything she loved was already gone. Instead, she whispered, "Why do this for me? You owe me nothing." He turned his head, studying her as if the question were carved into her bones. "In my village we say a woman who carries life carries the future of us all. To protect you is to protect tomorrow." She let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. "Tomorrow. I don't even know if I'll see the sun go down today." Mato reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he rested his hand lightly on her forearm. His palm was warm, steady. It felt like an anchor when she had. "None. You will," he said simply. "You must." The morning broke clear, but cold. Mato helped her onto the horse, a sturdy paint gelding with patient eyes, and they rode west, keeping to the shelter of low draws and cottonwood stands, where the wind carried their scent away from the open plains. They spoke little. Sorella drifted in and out of a dazed half-sleep, lulled by the horse's gait and the low murmur of Mato's voice whenever he sensed her slipping too deep into darkness. He told her stories, not all in English, but the meaning wrapped itself around her like a threadbare quilt. He spoke of his mother, who taught him to track deer by the bend of broken grass, of his sister, who died during the last hard winter when food grew scarce and the soldiers burned their stores, of the spirit of the bear that watched over him when he took his name. The world blurred behind her eyelids. Faces came and went, some familiar, some born only of fever and fear. Each time she opened her eyes, Mato was still there, a dark shape, riding beside her, glancing back whenever her breath caught too sharply in her throat. They stopped near midday by a creek that cut through the prairie like a silver scar. Mato lifted her gently from the saddle, his arms careful as they bore her weight. When her legs buckled, he did not let her fall. He found a hollow where the grass grew thick and tall. There he built a small lean-to from bent willow branches, and draped his blanket over it to block the worst of the wind. Sorella lay curled on her side, eyes half closed. Her hand never strayed far from her belly. The child within her seemed to sense the world had turned dangerous, kicking now and then like a fist against a locked door. Mata sat cross-legged outside the shelter, scanning the horizon with the unblinking stillness of a hawk. His rifle rested across his knees. When Sorella shifted, groaning at another sharp pain, he murmured something soft, a word she could not catch but that felt like a blessing. A sound reached them then, a distant echo that made the hair on the back of Sorella's neck rise. Hoofbeats. Not one horse, but many. Mata stiffened. His hand tightened on the rifle. He turned to her, his voice urgent but low. Stay here, do not move, no sound. Fear clamped down on her throat. She reached for him, but he was already gone, melting into the tall grass like a ghost titched. From shadows, the hoofbeats drew closer. Sorella pressed a hand over her mouth, willing her breath to stay silent. Her heart drummed against her ribs like the beat of war drums she'd once heard at a trading post. Celebration, only this rhythm carried no promise of dance, only of blood. Through a slit in the lean-to, she glimpsed them. 3 riders, white. Men in tattered coats, rifles strapped to their saddles. Eyes sharp with the feral glint of men who'd learned the prairie's cruelty and decided to match it. Wagons hit back east. One said, spitting into the grass, bet there's pickings still. Maybe a pretty widow or two hiding like rabbits. Sorella's blood went cold. Her hand drifted to the small knife Mato had slipped into her palm that morning, more a gesture than a real defense, but it felt heavier now, its bone handle warm with her sweat. The men dismounted, spreading out, peering into every clump of grass and every hollow in the creek bank. One drew closer, boots crunching twigs just feet from where she lay. A voice cracked the silence like a whip. Looking for something, white man. It was Mato. He stepped from the grass not 20 paces away, rifle held low but ready. He looked, carved from the same wind that bent the prairie grass, his presence so sudden it seemed impossible. The man froze, eyes flicking from Mato's rifle to the shadow of Sorella's lean-to. Ain't none of your business, Redskin. Mato's expression did not change. He lifted the rifle half an inch, enough to make the threat plain. This place is not yours to take from. The second man, older, with a scar splitting one eyebrow, laughed, but the sound was too brittle to carry true humor. 1 man against 3, maybe you're the fool here. The standoff stretched tight as rawhide. Sorella's breath snagged in her throat as the first man's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. Mato shifted his stance. Take your horses. Ride east. If I see you again, I put you in the earth. The third man, a boy, really, his cheeks raw from windburn, spoke. Up. What's worth dying for out here, savage? Sorella's fingers tightened on the knife's hilt. The baby kicked hard, as if to remind her that there was more than her life at stake. Mato did not move, did not blink. You decide, he said simply. The older man weighed the distance, his eyes calculating. Sorella saw the moment he made his choice, how greed curdled to fear when he realized the risk outweighed the reward. Come on, he snapped at the others. Ain't worth the bullet. They backed away, spitting curses, climbing into their saddles with stiff, angry movements. One glanced back at Mato, eyes filled with the promise of trouble yet to come. But they rode on east, toward the sun that rose bloody behind them. When the sound of hooves faded, Mato lowered his rifle. He stood unmoving until he was sure the wind would not carry new riders to their camp. Only then did he kneel by Sorella's shelter, his eyes meeting hers through the small gap in the branches. You are safe, he said, voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. For now, Sorella's shoulders shook. The knife slipped from her fingers into the grass, but deep inside, she felt something stronger than fear rooting itself where grief had once made its home. The prairie was wide and cruel and full of teeth, but she would not face it alone. Not now, not ever. The prairie dawn bled into morning, slow and gray, washing the world in a thin light that made the shadows seem restless. Sorella sat beside the ashes of their fire, watching the wind chase scraps of smoke through the tangled grass. Her shoulders ached from a night of half-sleep, every heartbeat reminding her that her time was drawing closer than she could bear to think. Mato moved through camp with the same quiet purpose that had become her anchor. He tethered his horse to a low cottonwood, checked the saddle straps for wear, his eyes always shifting from the horizon back to her. Each time their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, steady as a promise that neither of them spoke aloud anymore. She pulled her coat tighter around her belly. The baby had grown restless, feet tapping at her ribs like a signal drum. Each flutter felt like a question she didn't know how to answer. "Drink," Mato said, kneeling to pour warm water into the battered tin cup. He handed it to her, and for a moment their hands touched, her fingers cold and trembling, his dry and steady. She forced herself to sip, though her stomach turned with every swallow. How much farther? He looked east, where the sun lifted itself from the rim of the world in reluctant streaks of red. 2 days, maybe 3, we find village before snow comes. The way he said it made her feel like he believed the snow was another enemy they could outwit if only they kept moving. She wanted to believe it too. "Is it safe?" she asked. "Your people, will they even want me there?" A shadow passed through his eyes, brief but sharp. "You carry child. They welcome you." She wasn't so sure, but she held her tongue because arguing felt like wasted breath when every word scraped raw across her throat. Mato knelt and began tying bundles, careful loops of rope around blankets and spare clothes. His rifle lay within reach, a silent sentinel that never slept. She studied the scar that split his jaw, white against the copper of his skin. She'd traced it once in her dreams, wondering what blade or bullet had marked him, what stories were stitched into the jagged line that caught the light whenever he turned his head. "Mato." He glanced up. "HM? Why do you care so much?" Her voice cracked under the weight of the question. "You could have left me there. Anyone else would have." His hands stilled. He seemed to consider his words as if each one cost him more than the next mile of hard prairie. "Once, someone found me when I should have died. Fed me, hid me from the soldiers. Saved me." He met her gaze fully then, his eyes unblinking. "That man said, 'One day you carry the same fire for another. This is my fire to carry.'" She wanted to weep at that, but the tears would not come. She settled for reaching out, brushing her fingertips against the sleeve of his coat. It was rough wool, worn smooth where the rifle strap rested. He didn't flinch at her touch only. Dipped his head as if to tell her he understood what she could not say. They traveled that day through waist-high grass that hissed against the horse's flanks. Clouds gathered low, like a bruise smudged across the horizon. When the wind shifted, Sorella smelled snow and it a dry, metallic bite that made her throat close tight around her heartbeat. Her legs ached with every step. Mato walked beside the horse, one hand on the reins, the other never straying far from his knife. He moved with the patience of a man who knew the prairie's moods by the bend of the grass and the calls of distant birds. They crossed a narrow creek near midday. The water was low but swift, carving the earth into broken banks. Mato led the horse through first, boots sinking into the mud. Sorella clutched the saddle horn, trying not to let the cold seep into her bones. Halfway across, the baby shifted, sending a sharp pain up her spine. She gasped, almost slipping. Mato's hand shot up to steady her. "Easy," he murmured. "One step at a time." She wanted to curse him for his calm, for the way he made every impossible thing sound like something she could survive if she just held on long enough. But the words tangled behind her teeth. When they climbed the far bank, Mato scanned the plains behind them. A line of vultures circled high above the creek, a grim reminder of what waited for anyone left behind. "We keep moving," he said, voice flat as stone. "Too many ghosts in this place." By nightfall, they found a hollow sheltered by a ring of low hills. Dead cottonwoods leaned like crook old men, their branches rattling in the wind. Mato built a fire in a pit of stones, low and narrow, so its light wouldn't carry. Sorella sat with her knees drawn up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She watched the flames lick at the wood, sparks spinning into the black. The baby shifted again, stronger this time, so strong she bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. Mato squatted beside her, his shadow long and thin in the firelight. "Pain worse?" She nodded. Sweat beaded on her upper lip despite the cold. "It's coming. I can feel it." He didn't tell her it would be all right. He didn't offer pretty lies. Instead, he stood, rummaging through his pack until he found the bundle of dried herbs and a length of clean cloth. He handed her a leather strap. "For your teeth," he said. "When the time comes." Her fingers closed around it like a lifeline. "You've done this before?" He hesitated. "No, but my mother did. Many times." The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. Sorella forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. She focused on the rise and fall of Mato's shoulders as he sat near the edge of the camp, eyes fixed on the shadows shifting just beyond the circle of light. "Will you stay?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. He turned his head. Just enough for the fire to catch the curve of his jaw, the glint of his eyes. "Always." And somehow that single word made the shadows feel a fraction less sharp. When sleep finally took her, it came like a stone tossed into deep water, sudden and heavy. She dreamed of open hands reaching for her, of her mother's voice singing. In the half-light of a prairie unbroken by wagon ruts and blood, she woke with a start, a sharp cramp twisting low in her belly. Mato was at her side in an instant, the knife he'd been sharpening forgotten beside the fire. "It's time," she gasped, her nails digging into the blanket. "Mato, it's time." He nodded, calm as ever. He moved around her, adjusting the blankets, placing the leather strap in her palm. He spoke to her in Lakota, then words she didn't understand, but that felt like hands pressing her back when she wanted to bolt into the darkness and run until the pain let her go. She bit down hard when the next wave hit. The world narrowed to the fire's glow, the smell of wet earth, the rasp of Mato's voice in her ear. Each push felt like tearing herself open with her own hands. But every time she thought she'd slip into the dark and not come back, she felt Mato's fingers wrap around hers, steady and unyielding. "Breathe," he murmured. "You are stronger than the storm." Hours bled into one another. The fire hissed and popped. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled at the rising moon. Sorella's vision blurred until the stars overhead seemed to spin like lanterns hung from a sky she no longer trusted. Then, all at once, the world shifted. Pain gave way to something raw and bright, a sound tearing from her throat that did not belong to her, but to every woman who had ever brought life into a place meant only for death. A small, wet cry rose from the darkness. Mato's hands were gentle but sure as he wrapped the squirming bundle in a strip of clean cloth. He placed the child in her arms like an offering. Sorella stared at the baby's face, red and squashed and perfect. She felt a sob rise, then a laugh, then something that tasted of every prayer she thought she'd forgotten. "It's a girl," Mato said, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "Strong like you." She looked at him, tears blurring. "The firelight. What do we call her?" Mato's eyes shone with something more than reflection. "Whatever name you carry to tomorrow." Sorella bent her head over her daughter, breathing in the scent of new life, raw, wild, and stubborn as the prairie wind that had tried and failed to bury them both. In that fragile hush, She felt something grow inside her chest, a fire of her own, fierce enough to light the way through the darkness yet to come. The cold bit deeper in the hours after the child's first cry. Sorella lay half-propped on Mato's rolled blanket, her daughter nestled against her chest. Each small breath the baby drew was a miracle so fragile it seemed it could be snatched away with the next wind that rattled the dead branches overhead. Mata crouched at the edge of the fire, feeding it careful pieces of wood stripped from a fallen cottonwood. His hands moved with the same quiet strength she had come to trust, a strength that built warmth when there was none and carved hope out of a night that had tried its best to break them. Sorella touched the baby's cheek with her thumb. The skin was impossibly soft, damp still from birth and the hurried wash with a rag warmed over the fire. Her daughter's eyes were closed, but her mouth worked silently, testing air she'd never known. "What name?" Mato asked. He did not look at her when he said it. His eyes stayed fixed on the fire, as if the answer was too holy to meet head-on. Sorella's throat was raw. She swallowed once, tasting the salt of tears that had dried on her lips hours ago. "Alba." Mato looked at her then. A single brow lifted in question. "It means dawn," she murmured. "When my mother was alive, she told me that every new dawn is a chance. I want her to carry that, even when I can't." Mato seemed to weigh the word on his tongue, testing its shape in his own language. Then he nodded. "Alba, good name." They sat in silence while the fire hissed and the wind whispered its cruel promises through the grass. The baby stirred, rooting blindly against Sorella's breast. She shifted her blanket, pressing the child closer, and a wave of pain rolled through her lower belly, sharp, insistent. She gasped. Mato was beside her in a heartbeat, the back of his knuckles brushing her cheek. "Pain is strong after birth," she panted. "It's normal. Just help me sit forward." He did. His hands on her shoulders were as careful as if she were spun glass. When the pain passed, she leaned her forehead against his chest, drawing in the scent of smoke, leather, and something beneath it, all that was just him, earth and bone and promise. They stayed like that until the baby fell back into sleep, her tiny fists curled near her chin. Dawn came pale and flat, the sky washed in a color that made the world feel newly skinned. Mato packed their camp in silence, pausing only to hand Sorella sips of warm water steeped with the bitter roots he swore would keep her strong. Sorella held Alba against her shoulder, swaying slightly to soothe the fussing that came with each sudden gust of wind. The baby's cries were soft but insistent, proof of life that felt louder than any gunshot. When Mato lifted her onto the horse, she winced. Every muscle in her body ached like bruised fruit, and the saddle felt like a cruel joke after a night spent wrestling with death and birth. "Easy," Mato said, bracing her with one hand on her back. He adjusted the blanket around Alba's tiny head, tucking it beneath Sorella's chin. "Hold her close. Wind is sharp today." They set off again, following the line of a dry wash that twisted between low hills. The grass here was thinner, winter burnt to brittle gold. Overhead, clouds gathered in a slow, grim procession, their edges dark with the promise of snow. Sorell watched the sky, her mind turning circles around thoughts too big to hold. A new life in her arms, a man who had sworn to guard them both. A world that would just as soon chew their bones to splinters as give them shelter. Mato walked beside the horse, one hand on the reins, the other brushing the knife at his hip every so often, as if to remind the world that he would not yield. What was his to protect? By midday, the wind had stiffened. It howled across the prairie, lifting dust and grit until it scoured their faces raw. Alba fussed against Sorella's chest, her small cries muffled by the blanket. Mato halted them near a cluster of scrub and dry rock. He tied the horse to a low branch and crouched to build a small windbreak from stones and fallen limbs. "We rest here," he said. "She needs milk. You need food." Sorella's lips cracked when she smiled. "I don't have much milk yet." "You Will. He gave her a look that left no room for doubt. She settled herself behind the windbreak, bracing her back against a boulder. Alba latched onto her breast with a stubborn strength that made Sorella laugh through the ache. The sound startled her. How raw and alive it felt to hear her own laughter after so many days of nothing but grief's sharp edge. Matu returned with a handful of dried meat and 2 flasks of water. He set them down beside her but did not sit. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, watching the gray wall of clouds that crawled closer with the patience of a stalking wolf. "How far now?" she asked, her voice low to keep the baby calm. "Closer," he said. "Tomorrow we reach my uncle's camp. They take us in. Strong fire, warm place. Women there will help." Sorella closed her eyes. The promise of other hands to help, of a roof, even a hide tent, felt like something stolen from a fairy tale she had long stopped believing. "Mato," her voice trembled. "What if they don't want us?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw a flicker of something fierce behind the calm mask he wore. "They will want her, and they will want you. My uncle is a good man. He knows the old ways. A child born under the winter moon carries strong medicine. And me?" she pressed. "What am I but a burden?" His mouth twitched at the corner, as if the question were a joke only he understood. "You are the mother of Dawn." He gestured at the baby's sleeping face. "That makes you more than all the burdens in this world." She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she bent her head and kissed the soft fuzz of Alba's hair, breathing in the scent of milk and hope and raw survival. They moved on when the wind threatened to scatter their meager warmth. Matu led them into the low hills where stunted cottonwoods bent under the weight of years and storms. The sky turned the color of old bruises, the first flakes of snow spinning down like ashes. Sorella's teeth chattered as the horse picked its way through drifts that had begun to gather in the gullies. She pressed Alba close, the baby's warmth a fragile shield against the wind that clawed at her face. They crested a rise near dusk, the world below unfolding in a hush of white and gray. Smoke drifted from a small cluster of lodges at the base of a distant hill, thin trails that wove into the darkening sky like threads of hope. Mato's breath misted in the cold. "There, my uncle's camp." Relief hit her like a blow, sudden and sharp enough to make her vision swim. She wanted to weep, but the tears froze before they could fall. They descended into the shallow valley as the last light bled out of the sky. Figures emerged from the shadows, men wrapped in buffalo hides, their breath ghosting around them. Mato stepped forward to greet them, speaking in quick, low Lakota that Sorella could only half catch. She watched from the saddle, arms locked tight around Alba. One of the men, a broad-shouldered elder with braids streaked white as snow, peered up at her, his eyes narrowing against the wind. Mato spoke again, louder this time. His voice carried the shape of her name, Sorella, and then the softer shape of Alba's, as if he were offering them like a prayer. The elder's eyes shifted to hers. He studied her for a long heartbeat, then turned and barked an order to the others. A woman stepped forward, tall, wrapped in a heavy robe trimmed in beads and fur. She reached up, hands gentle but strong, as she guided Sorella down from the horse. Sorella's knees nearly buckled. The woman caught her elbow, steadying her. In a voice softer than the wind, she spoke words Sorella didn't know but somehow understood. "You are safe now." Sorella looked past her to Mato. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his hand resting on the horse's neck as if he needed the touch to keep from drifting away in the rising storm. And in that moment, Sorella knew that the promise he had made back at Dry Creek was not just words whispered over a dying fire. He had carried her through the ghosts and the cold, and the teeth of men who would have gutted them for a scrap of hope. He had kept the fire alive. And tomorrow, whatever tomorrow brought, he would do it again. Alba stirred against her breast, her tiny fingers curling into the folds of her mother's tattered coat. Dawn was not far now. The wind died down by the time they stepped inside the elder's lodge, but the cold lingered, coiling like a serpent at the threshold. Sorella felt it bite her skin even as she crossed into warmth. Smoke from a small central fire stung her eyes. Its sweetness mixed with the smell of sage and dried hides. Alba whimpered against her chest, unsettled by the sudden light and the shapes that moved around them in the flicker of the flames. Mato guided her forward with one hand on her back steady, always steady while the elder barked instructions. In Lakota, a young girl scurried to stoke the fire higher, tossing a bundle of dried sage into the flames. Sparks danced up toward the roof, disappearing through the hole at the top where the smoke spiraled out into the snow-laced dark. Sorella's eyes roamed the lodge. It was nothing like the wagon she'd left behind or the canvas tents pitched on the plains. This place felt older, shaped by hands that knew how to bend bone and hide and wood into shelter that breathed with the wind instead of fighting it. A woman knelt by her side. She was older than Sorella, her hair bound in too thick, braids threaded with blue glass beads. Her hands, when they reached for Alba, were warm and dry, their touch so sure that Sorella's arms surrendered her child before her mind could argue. "She will not go far," Mato murmured, as if he felt the quake in Sorella's chest. "I promise." Sorella nodded, but her arms felt hollow without Alba's tiny weight. The woman rocked the baby gently, cooing in a language that carried the hush of winter winds and the patience of stone. Another girl brought warm cloths, dipping them into a clay pot by the fire. Sorella sank down onto a pile of furs, exhaustion dragging her bones down like stones tied to her limbs. The elder approached her then, the beads on his chest clicking. Together like small, sharp truths, he spoke, and though she caught only fragments, she felt the question behind his eyes. Why had Mato brought her here? What storm followed in her wake? Mato answered in Lakota, his voice low but unyielding. Each word seemed to chip away at the elder's frown, though doubt still clung like frost on his brow. When Mato finished, the elder looked down at her. His gaze was heavy but not unkind. He bent forward, pressing his palm gently against her forehead. Then to Alba's, he muttered something to Mato, who nodded once, a brief, sharp dip of his chin before shuffling back to the fire. Mato knelt beside her, his shadow a wall between her and the worst of the cold that seeped through the lodge walls. "They will let us stay, for a while." "For a while?" She hated how small her voice sounded. "And after?" His mouth tightened, but he did not lie. "We prove we belong. We help. We listen. That is how it is done here." She let out a soft, brittle laugh. "You've carried me this far. If they cast us out, you know what I'll do?" He raised a brow. "I'll follow you," she said, "wherever you go." His eyes softened, then just for a heartbeat. "Then you will be safe." Night folded itself around the lodge. Women drifted in and out, bringing fresh water, strips of smoked meat, a blanket stitched with the shapes of mountains and rivers. One brought her a bowl of broth so rich it made her head spin. Sorella drank it slowly, feeling warmth creep back into the corners of her chest. She drifted somewhere between waking and sleep, her ears full of the soft hum of voices that reminded her of a stream in spring. She caught fragments, talk of a raid gone wrong, the painted horse gang, soldiers pushing north. Warnings that the storm was not finished with them yet. Through it all, Alba slept in the crook of the older woman's arm, her tiny mouth parting. In the same small size that had once filled Sorella's nights back at Dry Creek, when she and her husband still spoke of the future like it was something they could shape with their own hands. She did not know when Mato lay down beside her. One moment she was alone with the low crackle of the fire and the heartbeat of her daughter's breath. The next he was there close enough she could feel the brush of his coat against her elbow. "Sleep," he said, so softly she wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or if the word lived only in her thoughts. So she did. The days that followed settled into a rhythm she could never have imagined back on the trail, dotting the mornings. She woke to the scent of sage smoke and the steady hush of women tending small fires outside the lodges. Alba cried when the dawn crept through the flap, her voice thin but growing stronger with each sunrise. The elders' people took turns helping Sorella young girls carrying fresh water, older women showing her which roots to chew to help the milk come easier. Matu drifted through it all like a dark, patient star. He spent hours hunting with the men, returning each evening with strips of fresh meat slung across his shoulder. Some days he came back with snow caked into the hem of his leggings, his cheeks raw with windburn, but his eyes always found hers first, the silent promise there. I am still here. One night, when Alba had finally fallen into sleep after a fretful day, Sorella slipped out into the crisp dark. The camp lay quiet, except for the distant howl of wolves far across the prairie. She found Matu by the fire pit outside the elder's lodge, skinning a rabbit with slow, careful cuts. He did not look up when she settled across from him, but his shoulders eased, the tension uncoiling like a knot that had forgotten it could loosen. "Why do you never sleep?" she asked. He kept working, his knife glinting in the starlight. "Sleep is for those who trust the dark. And you don't?" He finally looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the fire. "I trust you. And her. Not what waits outside." Sorella hugged her knees to her chest. "You're not alone now. You know that, don't you?" A ghost of a smile crossed his mouth. "Not alone." They sat together until the rabbit was cleaned and the fire burned down to red coals. Somewhere behind them, a woman hummed a lullaby. To a crying child, a sound that made Sorella's heart ache in a way she could not name. When she finally rose to go back inside, Matu's voice caught her. "Sorella," she turned. He held out his hand, rough, scarred, waiting. She placed her palm against his, feeling the warmth there, the life that pulsed through bone and blood, and every vow that had carried them both across miles of frozen ground. He did not say more. He did not have to. By the fifth day, whispers began to weave through the camp like smoke. Riders seen at the edge of the hills. Fresh tracks where none should be. Horses missing from a nearby hunting party. Sorella heard it in snatches. Women lowering their voices when she passed with Alba wrapped tight against her chest. "The painted horse gang," they said. Soldiers who paid out coin for blood. Settlers who thought the Lakota camps easy prey. Matu heard it too. His eyes grew harder each evening when he returned from the hunt, his voice quieter when he told her that they might have to leave sooner than promised. Sorella's fear clawed at her throat, but she swallowed it down each time when Matu sat across from her at the fire. She forced her hands not to tremble as she reached for him. Each night she whispered the same words when she pressed Alba into his arms. "She needs to feel your warmth too." And each night he held the baby like he held every vow he had made close to the place in his chest that no bullet or blade had ever touched. The first snowstorm came heavy in the night. It buried the lodges in drifts that piled like ghosts at the doorways. The wind howled and snapped, rattling the lodge poles until Sorella feared they might splinter like wagon wheels on the trail. Inside, the fire burned low, the air thick with the breath of a dozen people pressed together for warmth. Alba slept at her breast, her tiny fists balled tight against her mother's ribs. Sorella lay awake, staring at the shifting shadows on the lodge walls. Matu sat by the entrance flap, his rifle across his knees, his head bowed but his eyes wide open. Outside, something moved, a crunch of footsteps that did not belong to the storm. Sorella's breath caught. She felt Alba shift against her, her soft whimper cutting through the hush. Matu lifted his head. He held up a single hand palm. Wait. The footsteps came again. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, cut through the wind. "Come out, Matu. We know you're in there. Bring her too." The white woman. Bring her. Sorella's stomach turned to ice. She could see it all at once, the massacre at Dry Creek, The painted faces of men who shot first and looted later. The promise of violence that clung to every ragged word that drifted through the storm. Mato rose slowly. He leaned close, his whisper a blade pressed to her heartbeat. Stay here, no sound, hold her tight. Sorella clutched Alba so close she felt the baby's heartbeat merge with her own. She watched Mato step into the swirling snow, his silhouette framed by the flicker of the fire. The storm swallowed him whole, and in that breathless silence, with her daughter pressed against her chest, Sorella made a promise of her own one. That tasted of blood and ash and the first dawn she would fight to see again. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The blizzard swallowed Mato's figure in seconds. One heartbeat he was there, rifle slung low, shoulders squared against the snow-laden dark, and the next, the world folded around him, hiding him like a secret that might never return. Inside the lodge, the air pressed close. The old woman who had helped deliver Alba muttered prayers under her breath, her hands working a string of bone beads that clicked like tiny teeth. The elder squinted through the smoke hole, eyes narrowed at the shadows that shifted between the co-divan. Storm's howls. Sorella kept her back braced against the packed hide wall. Alba fussed in her arms, her small fists striking the air as if she, too, could sense the threat waiting beyond the flap. A crack of voices came through the storm, harsh, guttural English mixed with jeers and slurred Lakota. Sorella tasted bile as the wind carried the words inside. Promises of burning, of dragging her out, of ending what the massacre at Dry Creek had begun. The old woman leaned close, her voice a rasp. If they come, you do not beg. You do not cry. You hold the child close, and you do not let them see your fear. Sorella could not answer. Her mouth was dry as dust. She pressed her palm over Alba's tiny ear, willing the baby to stay quiet as the storm rattled the lodge poles overhead. Single shot rang out, a dull thud swallowed by the snow, but sharp enough to silence every voice inside the lodge. Then another. Then a scream, high and raw, before the wind swallowed it whole. Mato's voice rose next, clear and cutting, carrying words she could not understand but felt in her bones. Warnings, curses, promises. Then the flap burst inward, dragging, a swirl of snow and shadow behind it. Mato stumbled through first, his rifle clutched in one hand, the barrel slick with fresh blood. His other arm was pinned tight to his side, red soaking the fringe of his coat. Behind him came the shape of a man, broad, with a hat pulled low and a grin that gleamed in the fire's flicker. His boots dripped snow onto the furs. Well, look. At you, the man rasped, voice rough with whiskey and smoke. Brought your pet back here to die with the rest of you. Mato turned, half blocking the man's path. You leave now, he hissed. Last chance. The man's grin widened. He lifted a pistol, cocking the hammer with the lazy patience of a cat toying with a quartered bird. Ain't no leaving for you, friend. And that pretty piece you stole, she comes with me. Sorella's blood turned to ice. She pressed Alba closer, her back scraping the rough hide as she inched toward the lodge wall. She could see the whites of the man's eyes, wide with greed, the spittle that shone on his beard. The old woman moved first. She lunged at the man's side, bone beads flying from her fingers like shards of bone. The pistol barked once, smoke blooming inside the lodge like a burned offering. Sorella didn't see the old woman fall, she only heard the thud, felt the heat drain from the room, as if the wind outside had found its way through her skin. Mato roared a sound she had never heard from him before. He threw himself at the man, rifle swinging like a club. They crashed into the fire pit, embers exploding in a cloud that filled the lodge with sparks. Sorella saw it all in flashes. Mato's teeth bared like a wolf's, the man's pistol striking Mato's wounded side, the elder rising behind them with a hatchet raised high. Steel met flesh. The man screamed, the pistol dropped into the coals, and Mato drove the butt of his rifle up beneath the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The man's scream choked off in a wet gasp. It was over in a heartbeat. The elder shoved the body aside with his foot, cursing under his breath as he leaned over Mato. Sorell pushed forward, Alba wailing now, her cries a thin thread against the roar in Sorella's ears. "Mato!" she gasped. "Mato, look at me," he did, but his eyes seemed to drift. His coat was soaked dark, steam rising where blood met the embers. He tried to stand, but the elder pressed him down, barking orders to the younger women who crowded the edges of the lodge. Sorella knelt, rocking Alba in one arm as she reached for Mato's free hand. His fingers were icy, his grip strong for a moment before it weakened. "You stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? You promised." His eyes flicked to hers, still burning with the wild defiance she had seen that day on the plains when he found her beneath the wrecked wagon. His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Dawn," he rasped. "You and Alba, Dawn." She didn't know if he meant the child or the sunrise or some prayer she could not speak. She just clung to his hand, willing her warmth. Into his bones. Behind them, the elders' people moved fast. The lodge filled with voices, the air split by commands that sounded more like the crack of a whip than words of comfort. Someone dragged the man's body outside, letting the wind claim him as it had claimed the wagons at Dry Creek. Hours bled into each other. The old woman, revived with a gash along her cheek, worked beside the elder to pack Mato's wound with herbs that smelled of bitter earth and pine. Sorella sat pressed to his side, dozing in fits, waking each time Mato's breathing hitched. When dawn finally broke, it came like an apology, pale and soft as the baby's hair against her chin. Alba fussed for milk, latching on greedily while Sorella watched the lines in Mato's face relax by a fraction, the deep furrow between his brow easing as sleep finally dragged him under. The elder sat across the fire, his voice low. "He live," he said in halting English, meeting her eyes with something like respect. "Because of you. Because he fight for you." Sorella swallowed the knot in her throat. "And you? Will you let us stay now?" The old man snorted, a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so raw. "Stay, you are family now. Painted horsemen come again, we bury them same way." His hand rose, fingers flicking toward Mato. "This one, he carries strong heart, but you carry his fire, do not forget." Sorella wanted to promise she wouldn't, that she'd carry that fire until her bones turned to dust. But her voice broke around the words, so she nodded instead, cradling Alba closer as the wind outside softened to a hush that sounded almost like forgiveness. By midday, Mato stirred. His eyes opened, clearer than she expected, the lines around them deeper but filled with something like triumph. "You stayed," he rasped. She laughed, then sharp and bright enough to make Alba startle awake and blink up at her. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I go?" He reached for her hand. This time, his grip was strong, unyielding, the way she needed it to be. Outside, the wind rose again, but it no longer carried the taste of ash and ruin. Somewhere in that battered camp, hope flickered small and stubborn, but alive. And for the first time since Dry Creek, Sorella knew they would not run, not anymore. Together, they would make this place home whether the wind liked it or not. The snow fell gentle that morning, thick flakes drifting through the gaps in the lodge's roof like white feathers. Sorella sat with Alba in her lap, humming a tune that was half lullaby, half memory. Outside, the camp stirred awake with the brittle crackle of footsteps crunching on ice. Mato slept nearby, his chest rising and falling with each slow breath. The old woman had pressed a poultice of cedar and wild mint to his side, and its scent mixed with the fire's smoke until the air tasted of earth and healing. Sorella shifted Alba to her shoulder. The baby fussed, pushing tiny fists against her collarbone. Even her small cries felt louder now, strong enough to drown out the ghosts that still lingered at the edges of Sorella's thoughts. She heard footsteps outside the lodge, 2 sets, one heavy, one lighter. The flap parted, and the elder ducked in, snow clinging to his fur-lined cloak. Beside him trailed a young boy, eyes wide under a shock of black hair. The elder gestured with a tilt of his chin. "Your man, he still sleep?" Sorella brushed her fingers over Mato's forehead. He stirred, but did not wake. "He's resting. He needs more time." The old man grunted approval. "Strong, that one. Strong enough to make enemies wonder if the wind favors him." He crouched by the fire, motioning the boy forward. The child knelt, pulling a small bundle from under his coat, 3 strips of dried meat wrapped in rabbit skin. "For you," the elder said, "and for the child, we share what we have. This winter is long." Sorella's throat tightened. She took the meat, her hands trembling with the hunger she hadn't dared name. "Thank you." The elder studied her, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "More snow coming, bad snow, wind that cuts like bone. When it clears, we move," she asked. "Where?" "West," he said simply. "Away from soldiers. Away from painted horsemen. There is a place where the buffalo come, where the water runs sweet." The boy's eyes flicked from Mato to Sorella, curiosity bright behind his shyness. He reached a hand toward Alba's tiny fist. Sorella shifted so the child could see the baby's face. "This one," the elder murmured, voice dropping low, "will bring change. I see it. Blood and winter cannot bury what you carry in her name." Sorella felt Alba's warmth seep into her chest like a promise. She nodded, unable to speak. The elder rose with the creak of old bones. "When he wakes," he said, jerking his chin at Mato, "tell him the painted horsemen were seen. Tracks near the old trail. They will not stop." Sorella's pulse quickened, but she held his gaze. "We won't stop either." His mouth curled, not quite a smile but close enough to warm her for a heartbeat. "Good. That is what makes us dangerous." They buried the dead man that afternoon, dragging what was left of him beyond the lodge circle. The snow covered the shallow grave in hours, hiding the fresh earth like a wound that would never scar. Mato woke by dusk, blinking at the firelight, his breath ragged but steady. Sorella pressed water to his lips. "The elder says the painted horsemen are close again." He didn't flinch. He only laid his palm over hers, his skin fever warm. "Then we stay ready." When the night pressed in, the camp huddled tight. Fires burned low to keep the smoke thin. Sorella lay with Alba in the crook of her arm, her free hand resting on Mato's chest. She felt the rough catch of his breath beneath her fingertips, the stubborn drumbeat that said he was not done fighting. In the hours before dawn, she dreamed of Dry Creek again, of wagon wheels shattered in a frozen rut, of her husband's voice calling her name. But this time, the dream changed. This time, she saw Mato standing on the ridge, rifle slung across his shoulder, his eyes turned not backward, but forward, into a horizon no bullet could touch. When she woke, the snow had deepened. The lodge walls sagged under its weight. Outside, the sound of shovels scraping and voices barking orders drifted in. The world felt small, closed in by white. "I should help," she whispered. Mato's hand caught hers before she could rise. "Stay." "I'm not broken," she said, sharper than she meant to. "I can carry water, feed the fires. I'm not some thing to hide in the dark." His eyes flicked to Alba, sleeping at her side. "You carry more than yourself now. That is enough." Sorella glared at him, but the fight drained away when he pressed her hand to his chest again. His heart beat loud against her palm. "You are not hidden," he said. "You are here, with me." She didn't know how to argue with that. So she stayed. The storm lasted 3 days. On the second morning, a scout returned with news that sent a hush through the camp. A painted horse raiding party had been seen skirting the hills to the east, their tracks half buried by fresh drifts. Sorella heard it in whispers while she helped. The older women sort smoked meat and stacked dried roots. She felt eyes flick to her belly, to the baby strapped to her chest. Some of the young hunters looked at her with open curiosity, others with quiet suspicion, as if she were the storm itself. Carrying trouble in her wake. At dusk, she found Matu outside, sitting on a fallen log near the tree line, rifle resting across his knees. His wound bound tight beneath layers of hide and wool. "You should be inside," she said, but her voice held no bite. "The storm hides tracks, hides men," he said, scanning the distant white. "They could come now, could come tonight." Sorella lowered herself beside him. Alba shifted, sighing in her sleep. "If they come," she asked quietly, "do we run again?" Mato's jaw tightened. "No more running." She let that settle in her bones. "Then what? Then we fight," he said. "Or we make them see that what they want costs more than they can pay." She brushed her thumb over the scar along his jaw. "And if they don't care about the cost?" He turned to her then, his eyes dark and unblinking. "Then we make it anyway." That night, Alba refused to settle. Her small cries cut through the lodge like needles. Sorella rocked her, murmuring the old songs her mother used to hum while braiding her hair by the lamplight. Songs that spoke of rain and wheat and rivers that never dried. When Alba finally drifted off, Sorella lay her down beside Matu. He stirred, eyes half opening. "She dreams loud," he rasped. "She dreams strong," Sorella corrected. She traced the edge of his palm with her fingertip. "Like you." He caught her hand, pulling it to his mouth. His lips brushed her knuckles, rough and warm. "Like us." They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the wind rose again, rattling the lodge poles overhead. In the hush between the gusts, Sorella heard it, the distant echo of hoofbeats muffled by snow. A promise of storm inside a storm. She did not close her eyes. Not that night. When dawn came, it was a pale thing, more shadow than sun. The first figure appeared on the ridge just as the camp stirred, a rider wrapped in a ragged duster, rifle strapped across his back. He stood still for a heartbeat, just long enough for the snow to cling to his hat brim. Sorella pressed her palm to Mato's chest. "They're here." His eyes opened, clearer than they had been in days. "Then so are we." The sun stayed hidden that morning, buried under a sky the color of old bruises. Sorella stood near the lodge entrance, Alba strapped tight against her chest, her breath puffing into the cold air. Each gust of wind carried the taste of iron-like old blood that never quite washed clean. Below the ridge, the rider sat his horse with an ease that spoke of long days on the trail and longer nights spent waiting for the sound of boots. Creeping close, he didn't move, didn't wave a hand or lift his hat. Just watched the camp as if he could pick apart every soul huddled inside its circle of smoke. Matu stepped out beside her, his coat pulled close, the fresh dressing on his side hidden beneath layers of wool and hide. His hand brushed hers, a silent tether as they stood shoulder to shoulder. "He won't come alone," Matu said. His voice was low, but carried the certainty of a man who'd seen enough winter to know that trouble always traveled with a pack. Sorella's fingers flexed against Alba's blanket. "How many?" "Too many," he said simply. "But the wind favors us today, hides us the way it hides them." They watched in silence as the rider shifted in his saddle, spit into the snow, then turned his horse downslope. From the trees behind him, more shapes emerged, men wrapped in blankets and patched coats, rifles glinting when they caught what little light broke through the clouds. Matu's fingers found her wrist. "Go inside. Tell the elder. Take Alba deep behind the lodge circle." "No." His head turned sharply. "No?" She swallowed the quake in her throat. "We hide, they know we're afraid. They see me standing, they know you have more to lose. They'll come harder, I stay here." For a heartbeat, he looked as though he might argue. But he just nodded once, then stand straight. "Make them think you have iron in your spine." She squared her shoulders, every part of her trembling but refusing to bend. She held Alba close enough to feel the baby's warm breath against her. Neck a heartbeat that reminded her the world could still grow new things, even when it seemed determined to bury them in snow. The painted horse riders came slow, the crunch of hooves and the jingle of tack swallowed by the wind. Sorella counted 7 men, maybe more, half hidden behind the drifted trees. One step forward, a purvase, tall man with a hat dragged low and a coat stitched from at least 3 others. His grin was broad, his teeth chipped like broken flint. "Morning," he called, spreading his arms like a preacher blessing a congregation. "I heard you've got something that belongs to us." Or maybe someone. No one answered. From the corner of her eye, Sorella saw the elder emerge, leaning on his carved stick, the feathers at its head swaying in the wind. Young hunters flanked him, bows strung, arrows nocked but not raised yet. The man's grin widened when he spotted Sorella. "There she is. Knew we'd find you again, Missy. You left Dry Creek a mess behind you. Lot of good pickings we had to split with the crows." Sorella's mouth tasted of ash. She felt Alba shift, small noises muffled by the cloth wrapped around her dot. The man clicked his tongue. "Now don't you fret. We'll be kind enough to take you back with us. Your fella there," he jabbed a finger at Mata, "he can crawl back to whatever hole he came from. Or not. Don't much matter to me." Mato stepped forward, boots crunching on the snow. His voice was calm, soft enough that Sorella had to lean closer to hear. "You ride on, or you stay here, in the earth." A few of the riders behind the man shifted, sharing glances. One laughed, but it sounded forced. The tall man barked a laugh of his own. "Brave words, but we got numbers, friend. You got women and old men, and her." He jerked his chin at Sorella. "You think we're scared of your sticks and your old prayers?" The elder stepped closer, the wind tugging his braids sideways. His voice was like gravel sliding across ice. "You fear nothing. Then you lose everything." The man's eyes flicked between them, his grin slipping just a fraction. "We'll take the girl, the babe too. She's no use here." Sorella's fingers tightened on Alba's blanket. She felt her nails bite the fabric. The fear was there, like a river swelling behind a dam, but beneath it, something else sparked. Something that tasted like the memory of her husband's voice shouting her name before he fell. Like the grit in Mato's whisper when he promised they would make it. No, the man blinked. What was that? Sorella stepped forward, feeling Mato shift to block her, but she slipped to his side. "No," she said again. Her voice didn't crack, it didn't waver. "You come for me, you leave nothing but bones." A snort of laughter came from behind the tall man. One of the riders leaned out, rifle across his saddle. Big talk for a white girl playing squaw. Sorella felt Mato's breath at her shoulder. "Your next word," he said, his voice so low she felt it in her teeth, "will be your last." Silence fell. The wind shifted. A single snowflake landed on Alba's cheek and melted where Sorella's warmth touched it. The elder lifted his stick, pointing it like a spear. "This place holds our dead, holds our prayers. You want to burn it? Then come, we will watch your bones feed the crows." The tall man spat. His grin twisted sharp. "Maybe we will." He turned to bark orders, but his words were drowned by the sudden whistle of an arrow. It struck the snow at his horse's hooves, quivering like a warning. A second arrow followed, grazing the leg of a rider in the back. The man cursed, rearing his mount sideways. From the trees beyond the lodge circle, more shapes moved, Lakota hunters returning from the hills, bows drawn, knives glinting like teeth in the weak dawn light. The tall man's grin vanished. He scanned the ring of faces, the line of bows aimed steady as a heartbeat. His fingers flexed on his reins. "Easy now," he began. Mato's voice cut him off, carrying through the hush. "Your next word." The man's eyes flicked to Sorella, then back to Mato, weighing the snow, the wind, the arrow shafts that might find his ribs before he could draw breath. He spat again, this time into the snow at his horse's feet. "Wheel! Be back. This ground's got no fences, no soldiers. Just sticks and prayers." He yanked his reins, wheeling his horse around. The other riders hesitated, then followed, drifting like shadows swallowed by the storm. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did Sorella let out the breath she'd been holding. Alba stirred against her chest, whimpering as if sensing the tension that bled into the snow around them. The elder lowered his stick. "They will come again." Mato nodded once. "So will we." Sorella pressed her cheek to Alba's soft hair. In the distance, the wind carried the riders' curses away across the white. She felt Mato's hand on her shoulder, warm and solid. When the elder turned to go back to the lodge, he paused beside her, eyes sharp as flint. "You stood. That is the beginning." Sorella didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what storm, what bullet, what new grave dug into frozen earth. But she knew this, she would stand. And if the painted horsemen came again, they'd find more than sticks and prayers waiting for them. They'd find her. They'd find all of them. And that would be enough. By the next dawn, the cold settled deeper than ever. It sank into the bones of the camp like a second spine, stiffening every movement, making every breath a cloud that drifted toward the lodge roof before disappearing into the cracks. Sorella knelt beside the fire pit, coaxing what warmth she could from the embers. Alba whimpered against her shoulder, tiny hands curling into fists when the chill touched her skin. Sorella pressed her lips to the baby's temple, whispering a promise she barely believed herself. Soon, soon warmth will come. Mato lay on. A bed of hides behind her, half sitting with his back braced against the lodge wall. His wound had stopped bleeding, but the fever burned stubborn as prairie fire. Each time his breath hitched, she felt it like a rock pressing into her chest. The elder ducked into the lodge, bringing a swirl of snow and the scent of pine smoke with him. He carried a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. He crouched beside Mato, unwrapping strips of dried roots and a handful of black leaves that smelled sharp and bitter. "This will pull the sickness out," the elder said, his English heavy but certain. "You chew it. Swallow nothing but the juice. Spit the rest." Mato nodded weakly, taking the bundle and shaking hands. Sorella pressed closer, catching the elder's sleeve. "Will it work?" The old man's eyes found hers, steady as stone. "It worked for my father, worked for his father. Now we see if it works for him." She held that answer tight, even as doubt tried to claw through it. Outside, the wind rose, again rattling the lodge poles like dry bones. She heard the voices of the young hunters moving between lodges, passing word that scouts would ride at first light seeking signs of the painted horsemen. Measuring the distance between one enemy and the next. Mato bit into the roots, his jaw flexing with the effort. He spat into the fire, the juice hissing as it struck the coals. Sorella squeezed his shoulder, feeling how the fever made his skin hot and clammy all at once. When the dawn broke fully, it brought no comfort, only light. That made the snow glare like a blade pressed to the throat of the land. Sorella helped the women pack what they could into bundles. Strips of smoked bison, pine nuts, dried chokecherries. They spoke little, their eyes flitting toward the ridge where riders might appear at any breath. A young girl handed Sorella a fresh wrap for Albasoft rabbit hide lined with thin wool. Sorella thanked her, wrapping the baby tight before slinging her close to her chest. The girl's eyes darted to Mato's sleeping shape, then back to Sorella's face. "He is strong," the girl said quietly. "The roots will help." Sorella wanted to believe it. She nodded, pressing her chin to the top of Alba's head to hide the sting in her eyes. They moved camp at midday. The sky pressed low, swollen with more snow that hadn't yet fallen. Sorella helped lash bundles to a travois, her hands stiff with cold and worry. Matu stirred when they lifted him onto a hide sled. He gripped her wrist when she knelt beside him. "You walk by me," he rasped. "Always," she said. "Always, Matu." The elder led the line westward, his stick tapping the frozen ground in a rhythm. That kept the youngest children close and the old ones steady. The hunters flanked the line, eyes sharp, bows strung tight as the breath in Sorella's lungs. Hours slipped past in a hush, broken only by the creak of sleds and the muffled wails of babies who did not yet understand what waited at the edge of the prairie. Once, as the sun slid behind a bank of bruised clouds, a scout rode back to the elder's side. Words passed quick and low. New tracks, fresh dung. A dead rabbit left skinned in the snow, a sign someone was following. Too close for comfort. Sorella pressed closer to Matu's sled. His eyes cracked open, hazy but watchful. "They come?" "Hin?" "Asked. They're behind us," she said. "But we're moving." He managed a dry laugh that caught in his throat. "Always moving. Better than waiting to die." She brushed a knuckle across his cheek. "Besides, the wind is ours." Matu's eyes drifted shut again. "Yours, always yours." They camped that night in a narrow cut between low hills, the kind of place where the wind howled, but the snow piled high enough to make a wall against the worst of the cold. Fires burned low and hidden. The elder moved between families, blessing each small circle of warmth with a handful of sage smoke and quiet words that made the children sleep deeper. Sorella sat with her back to Matu's sled, Alba tucked inside. Her coat. Each time the baby stirred, Sorella shushed her with words from old lullabies she only half remembered, words that tasted of warmer seasons and green fields she might never see again. When she looked up, she saw Matu's eyes open, clear for the first time since the fever took hold. He watched her without blinking. "Rest," she whispered. "We're safe for now." His lips twitched. "No one is safe in winter." She wanted to argue, but he caught her hand and squeezed, cutting off the words. "But you make me believe." Sorella bent over him, pressing her forehead to his. She felt the rough warmth of his breath, the stubborn life that had refused every wound and ghost the trail had thrown their way. Behind her, the hunters shifted, blades in their laps, eyes on the shadows that slithered at the camp's edges. They did not speak of the tracks found that evening, the old snow churned by too many horses. But Sorella heard it anyway, in the way the elder's chant turned sharp at the edges, in the way mothers pulled their children tighter when the wind rattled the brush above their shelters. She would not sleep that night. Neither would Matu, nor any who knew that when dawn rose over snow like this, it might be red with more than sunrise. Toward the dead of night, the storm broke. Wind roared down the narrow pass like a pack of wolves, tearing smoke from the fires and scattering embers. Across the snow, Sorella crouched low over Alba, shielding her with her body as the hide walls shuddered. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a horse screamed high and panicked. A shout followed, then another, then the crack of gunfire that snapped the fragile hush. Like brittle glass, Matu pushed himself upright, teeth gritted against the pain. "Keep her down," he rasped. "Keep her safe." Sorella gripped his wrist. "Where will you go?" He smiled, then a raw edge, the shadow of a man who had once been a blade honed for no other purpose than survival. "Where I must." He pulled the rifle. From where it lay by the sled, sliding off into the dark with the hunters who emerged like ghosts. Their feet made no sound on the snow. Their blades and bows whispered death into the storm. Sorella pressed Alba close, rocking her against her chest. She heard the chaos tear itself apart in bursts. A yell, a single shot, then silence deep enough to swallow the world. When the wind eased, footsteps returned. Matu's shape moved through the drifting snow, rifle slung low, face streaked with blood that wasn't all his own. He sank down beside her, breath heaving. "It's done. All of them?" she asked. He shook his head once, eyes fixed on Alba's tiny face. "No, but enough." Sorella kissed his brow, tasting salt and ash. She felt the baby shift, a warm weight reminding her that the dawn would come whether they were ready or not. Somewhere in the storm's dying breath, the elder's chant rose again, softer now, carrying the promise that even in a land so cold, it could break bone, there would always be fire enough to guard what mattered most. Dawn cracked open like an old scar, bleeding a thin line of gray over the hills. The storm had spent itself in the small hours, leaving behind drifts that caught the first weak light, making the world look softer than it was. Sorella didn't trust the softness. She sat near the burned-out fire, Alba wrapped tight in a sling across her chest. Every so often, she leaned down to feel the baby's breath, counting the small, steady puffs against her skin. She needed that rhythm, that proof that life still beat stubborn through the cold. Mata crouched by the tree line with 2 hunters. He moved carefully, favoring his injured side, but refusing to rest. She watched him trace boot prints half buried by the wind, his fingers brushing the snow like he could read it the way a preacher reads scripture. When he looked back at her, she saw the old edge in his eyes, the same one she'd seen when he first pulled her from the ruin at Dry Creek, the edge that said whatever came next, he would carve a path through it, or die on his feet trying. The elder appeared behind her, a blanket draped around his shoulders like a robe. His braids stirred in the breeze, beads tapping against bone earrings. He lowered himself to the snow beside her with a grunt. "Tracks go west," he said, voice flat as the plain. "They run, but they run with eyes over shoulders. They'll come back," Sorella said. It wasn't a question. The elder nodded once. A snake chased off into brush comes back with new teeth. She tightened her hold on Alba. The baby stirred, a small noise that made Sorella's chest ache with something too big to name. Motto, and the hunters returned, boots muffled in the new snow. He knelt, dropping beside Sorella. He smelled of pine and cold iron. His gloved hand settled over Alba's head, cupping the fragile heat there. "They left in a hurry," he said. "Left pieces of themselves behind. We move at midday. Keep ahead of them." The elder huffed, a dry chuckle that held no real humor. "You think you are wind, but winter moves faster." Motto's jaw tightened, but he only glanced at Sorella. "Better to move than wait." She met his eyes and found her answer there. Waiting was death. Moving, always moving, was the promise they'd made the day they'd sworn not to let Dry Creek be the end of their story. By the time the sun climbed overhead, the camp had folded itself small enough to slip into the trees. Travois scraped through the brush, babies strapped tight to mothers' backs. Hunters spread out in a loose ring, eyes cutting the horizon for any hint of movement. Sorella walked beside Mato's sled. He refused it now, stumbling along with one arm wrapped tight around his ribs. Each time he faltered, she slipped under his shoulder, taking some of his weight without saying a word. Alba slept, her face turned inward, mouth working against the cloth of Sorella's coat. Sorella hummed to her, the tune trembling at the edges but never breaking. A pair of boys ran ahead, scouts in training, their breath visible in bright puffs. One darted back with a handful of frozen berries, thrusting them into Sorella's palm, before vanishing into the brush again. She pressed one to Alba's lips, letting the baby taste the juice before popping the skin between her own teeth. It tasted like nothing, like water and memory and a future that hadn't been decided yet. They made camp at the edge of a frozen creek that night. The elder ordered no fire smoke would give them away. Instead, they wrapped themselves in furs and pressed close, sharing breath under hides stitched from stories older than any soldier's bullet. Mata drifted in and out, his head in Sorella's lap. Each time he woke, his eyes sought hers first, the lines around them easing when he saw her there. Once, his hand found Alba's small foot, the touch so careful it nearly undid her. "You should sleep," he murmured. "I will." "You say that every night." She stroked his hair back from his brow. "And you live every night, so maybe I'm right." He smiled, a ghost of it, then slipped back under. Sorella stayed awake long after the last baby's cry faded. Her ears strained for hoofbeats that might be ghosts, or might be the echo of Dry Creek's ruin chasing her across every mile of snow dot. She whispered promises into Alba's ear. You will not remember this cold. You will grow where the grass bends soft, where winter does not bite so deep. The wind carried her words away, but she spoke them anyway. Dawn found them on the move again. The creek bed turned south, bending around a stand of cottonwoods whose branches cracked under the weight of the last storm. The elder said there was a trader's trail beyond the rise, a path the painted horse men wouldn't think to watch. Sorella helped lash what little they had left onto the sleds. She felt her muscles ache like old wounds, but she kept moving. Each step was a debt she paid against a future she couldn't yet see. When they paused for breath at midday, Mato drew her aside, guiding her behind the line of low brush. I see how you watch, he said. His voice was low, edged with something she couldn't name. You wait for the old ghosts to come again. They will, she said. We both know that. Then stand like you did before. He reached out, brushing a thumb over her cheekbone. When they come, you don't kneel. She laughed, raw and soft. I'm not the one who needs reminding. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. We walk west. We find the place my uncle spoke of. We build walls so high winter can't find us. Sorella felt her breath catch. And when summer comes, we teach her. He glanced down at Alba, bundled against her breast, to run faster than the wind, to stand taller than the grass. Sorella kissed him then, quick and fierce. It tasted of salt and cold, and the promise that nothing, not even the ghosts that dogged their heels, would have the last word. They pulled apart when the elder barked from the trail's edge. The line was moving again. Mato leaned into her, just enough for her to slip under his arm. They walked that way into the falling dusk, three shapes pressed close. A heartbeat carried forward by the snow and the wind and the stubborn flame that refused to die no matter how many storms tried to bury it. Behind them, the sky swallowed the last of the tracks, hiding their path from the men who would always follow but never catch them whole. The next stretch of land was cruel in its quiet. A brittle hush lay over the trail west of the creek, broken only by the crunch of feet in sleds, the low mutter of wind through bare cottonwoods. Sorella walked with her head down, one arm curled around Alba's small, bundled weight. She'd grown used to the baby's warmth, pressed to her ribs, a reminder that every breath mattered more than her own. Mato limped at her side. He refused the sled again, though each step made the muscles along his jaw jump with the effort. The fever had broken days before, but weakness clung to him like a jealous lover. She caught him stumbling once, grabbed his elbow before he could hit his knees. Stubborn fool, she hissed under her breath. He gave her a crooked smile. You like this fool, she did. God help her, she did. By dusk, they reached the edge of a ravine. Its walls fell away sharp and sudden, a gash through rock that glowed gold where the sinking sun brushed its rim. The elder lifted his stick, peering down into the shadows below. We sleep there, he said. Trees to break wind, brush to hide fires. A murmur ran through the hunter's approval, relief, the wordless bond that grows between people who survive the same cold, the same teeth in the dark. They wound down the slope in a thin line, travois, bumping over frozen roots. Sorella could feel Alba's heartbeat under her palm, a soft rhythm that steadied her own. When they reached the bottom, the hunters spread out to set traps and check the hidden places where an enemy might watch from behind the trees. Mato settled beside a cluster of cedar, pressing his back against the trunk. He drew Sorella close. When she lowered beside him, his breath frosting in the hush, Sleep, he said, voice raspy. I'll watch. You can't hold your eyes open. He grinned, a flash of the wolf that had once survived alone on this same prairie. Sleep. Sorella. But she didn't. not fully. She drifted on the edge, Alba's weight a warm anchor, Mato's chest a barrier between her and the brittle cold dot in her half-dreams. She saw the painted horsemen, their faces shifting like water, each grin sharper than the last. They walked through the brush with rifles drawn, fire in their mouths, ghosts in their eyes. She woke when Mato stirred, his hand slipping to his side, fingers brushing the fresh bandage. She caught his wrist before he could pull it away. "You're bleeding again?" "No, just itches." She narrowed her eyes. He laughed soft, the sound making her throat tighten. "Go on, rest." She didn't argue, but her hand stayed over his, pressing the heat of her palm into the pulse that beat steady their dot at first light. The elder called a council at the creek's bend. Hunters gathered in a tight knot, their breath rising like steam from a pot. Sorella stood on the edge, Alba fussing at her breast, eyes wide at the new cold dot. The elder's stick tapped the ground 3 times. "Tracks found," he said, "east of here. 2 horses, maybe more behind." A murmur rippled through the group. One of the scouts, a boy barely old enough to grow a beard, shifted from foot to foot. They camped by the old rock marker. He sighed, left bones in the ashes, didn't bother to hide them. Sorella felt her stomach knot. She remembered what the painted horsemen did to those who didn't feed their pockets quick enough. Leaving bones was a promise. "We're not done yet." Mato's fingers brushed hers. "We keep moving." The elder shook his head. "The children, the sick, they can't outpace horses forever." Silence fell. Sorella felt the weight of a dozen eyes slip. To her, like they could see the ruin she dragged behind her ribs. She lifted her chin, daring any of them to say it aloud. This started with her. Let it end there. Mato's hand found hers, squeezing once. "We set a trap." A few heads turned, startled. The elder tilted his head, beads clinking against his braids. "Trap?" Mato nodded. "They follow the weakest. They see us moving, tired. Scattered, they push too close, hungry for the easy kill." He looked at Sorella, then really looked. Not past her, not around her. Through her dot, she read the question in his eyes. "Will you stand again?" She straightened, shifting Alba on her hip. "We stand." By midday, they'd laid their snare. The ravine would hold the old ones, the children, the injured hidden behind brush and cedar. The hunters would drift to the ridges above, bows ready, rifles loaded with rounds so precious they'd counted them twice before dawn. Sorella stayed. Near the center. Her hands itched for a weapon, but she had only her body, her back, her voice, her will. She could feel Alba's breath warm against her neck, the small weight that turned her veins to iron. Mata crouched beside a low rock shelf, rifle across his knees. He caught her eye once, gave a tiny nod. "Ready." The first rider came near dusk, a lone shape drifting down the slope like a carrion bird. He wore a fur-lined hat that covered half his face, but she knew him by the way he leaned in the saddle lazy. Like nothing could surprise him, another rider appeared behind him, then 2 more fanning out through the trees. They smelled the trap too late. By the time they saw the figures slipping through the brush, the line had closed around them. One shouted, a harsh bark that cracked open the dusk. Then came the snap of bowstrings, the cough of a rifle fired once. Twice, horses screamed, hooves pounded snow to slush. Sorella pressed Alba's head into her chest as Mato's voice cut through the storm, calling orders in a tongue older than the men they fought. It ended fast. Too fast. The first rider lay broken across a boulder. The second crawled 3 paces before the cold finished what the arrow had begun. The third and fourth fled, hooves throwing up a spray of frozen dirt as they vanished over the ridge. When it was done, the elder limped forward, his stick dragging a line in the snow behind him. He looked at Matu, then at Sorella. They will not forgive this. Sorella squared her shoulders. Neither will I. She felt Mato's hand slip around her waist. Alba stirred, a small cry echoing against the stone walls of the ravine. In that Narrow space. The wind fell silent for the first time in days. Sorella listened to the hush, the sound of her own heartbeat. She knew the next storm would come, men with guns, men with hunger, but she also knew they would find more than shadows. Waiting in the snow, they would find her. And this time, they would learn what it cost to chase something that refused to die quietly in the dark. The night after the ambush tasted of smoke and copper. Sorella sat just beyond the dying fire, the glow picking out the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the lines of her chapped lips. Alba dozed fitfully against her chest, each soft cry a tether that kept her rooted in a world still too raw to feel safe. The others lay scattered in small knots, bodies pressed together under hides stitched from rabbit and deer. Even sleep did not smooth the tension from their faces. They all knew what waited at the edge of the dark. Men who would come again, teeth bared, carrying the stink of revenge like a fever. Mato sat near the mouth of the ravine, where the trees gathered close like a woven net. He'd wiped the blood from his rifle, but a streak of it still clung to his jaw. Every so often, he pressed a palm to his side. The wound wept when it pleased, refusing to close as clean as the elder's herbs promised. When the wind shifted, he turned. His eyes found Sorella through the brush. She read the question there. Still standing? She pressed her palm over Alba's back and gave him the smallest nod she could manage. Still here. Dawn brought more wind. It crawled down the ravine's spine, whirring the ashes of their cooking fire, biting at exposed skin until it turned raw. Sorella forced herself up, stretching legs stiff with too many nights of half-sleep. She eased Alba into a fur-lined sling, snugged close to her heart. Mato was already on his feet when she joined him, one hand braced on a cedar trunk. His face was drawn, but his eyes still sparked with that hard, flinty light she'd first seen on the day they met. The elder joined them, leaning on his stick as he studied the slope above. "They run from us last night," the elder said. "But a snake's tail grows back. We move." Mato nodded. "We keep them guessing." Sorella glanced at the sky, flat gray, the color of an old bruise. "The women need rest. The children can't keep pace much longer." Mato's jaw ticked, but he did not argue. "We find the hollow I told you of, in the hills. If we hold there—" "Hold," she repeated, tasting the word. It felt like a dare. "If they come, they bleed for every step." The elder made a soft noise. That might have been approval, or might have been just the wind slipping through his teeth. They broke camp before the sun had cleared the ridge. The travois creaked under new weight, what little they salvaged from the bodies left behind. Powder horns, blankets stiff with someone else's blood, cartridges so precious they felt heavier than gold. Sorella walked beside Mato. She caught him listing once, shifting his grip on the sled runner that served as a crutch when his leg refused its duty. She slid her shoulder under his arm, felt the warmth of him leach into her even as the cold gnawed at the space between. "Don't tell. Meet her rest," she said. He almost smiled. "Wouldn't dare." They moved in silence after that, weaving through patches of brush that clawed at their clothes. Alba stirred once, a soft hiccup that made Sorella's chest ache with hope and fear, knotted so tight they were the same rope. It was near dusk when they found the hollow, a dip in the land, rimmed by rocks stacked like ancient teeth. Trees leaned overhead, their bare branches laced with old crow nests and scraps of cloud. The elder studied it with narrowed eyes, tapping his stick against a boulder. "It holds us. It hides us. And when they come—" He jabbed the stick at the rim. "We pour arrows down like rain." Mato pressed his palm to the stone, as if he could read its memories. "They'll circle, test our edges." Sorella shifted Alba to her other shoulder, adjusting the sling. "Then we give them the edges to cut themselves on." The elder barked a short laugh. "She has your tongue now," he said too. Mato only shrugged. "Better she have it than them." They built the fires low that night, shielding the glow behind piled snow and broken brush. Hunters took turns on the rim, eyes sharp for movement that might be deer or worse. The old women sang soft to restless babies, songs that slipped under. Sorella's skin like warm water dot, she sat with Madhu near the rocks. He leaned back, head tipped to watch the moon slide behind a drift of cloud. "You think this place holds?" she asked. His breath clouded the air. "Holds or breaks, like bone." Sorella traced her thumb along the back of his hand. "If it breaks? Then." "We don't." His eyes found hers, steady in the dark. "We bend." She laughed once, dry and soft. "You sound like the elder." Mato huffed. "I think he likes you. He likes that I won't run anymore." She shifted Alba, who nuzzled her collarbone, lips moving in sleep. "And you?" He turned his face toward hers. "I like that you stand, even when you shouldn't." Her throat closed around the answer she wanted to give. Instead, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his brow. The salt of old sweat and dried blood tasted like a promise sealed without words. The hunters brought back whispers at dawn, fresh tracks in the low hills, hoofprints fanning out like broken fingers. The painted horse men would not strike in daylight, the elder said. Night was their teeth. Night was when they believed the spirits would hold their hands steady. So they waited. They shored up the hollow's rim, bracing loose stones with branches. They set traps in the snow, snares that would snap a horse's leg like dry twigs. The young boys dug lines in the drifts with their spears, marking where the brush would hide waiting blades. Sorella worked alongside them. Alba tucked snug in the sling while she packed snow into the gaps. The older girls watched her when they thought she didn't see, eyes wide, mouths set hard. She knew what they saw. A woman who should have been buried with her wagon. Still here, still standing. At dusk, Mato pulled her aside. He pressed a bundle into her palm, a half circle of flint, the edge honed to a cruel gleam. "Keep it close," he said. She turned it in her hand, felt its weight, the promise it carried. "Will you be close?" He dipped his head, his forehead, brushing hers. Always. In the hush before the last light drained from the sky, Sorella tucked the blade into the folds of her sling, just above Alba's heartbeat. She felt the two weights pressed together, steel and child, promise and future. When the wind rose, carrying the scent of men who dreamed only of fire and ruin, she pressed her lips to Alba's hair and whispered the same words she had spoken each night since Dry Creek. "Not you, never you." And this time, she almost believed it. They came just before the moon broke through the clouds' shadows at first, then shapes hunched low over restless horses. Sorella heard them before she saw them. The creak of leather, the snort of a mount scenting something it couldn't name, the muffled thump of boots hitting snow. She lay curled against the inside rim of the hollow, Alba strapped to her chest, the baby's breath hot against her throat. Beside her, Mato crouched with his rifle balanced over the rocks, the barrel dark as the night sky. He hadn't spoken since they'd heard the first whistle from the scouts on the ridge, 3 sharp notes that told them the painted horsemen were closer than a stone's throw. There was no need for words now. The plan was stitched into each heartbeat, each exhale that ghosted into the brittle air. The hunters lay like roots at the rim, bows strung tight, knives clutched in fists that trembled only with the cold. Sorella felt the weight of the flint blade pressed against her ribs, just above where Alba slept. Her fingers brushed it once, steadying herself. It was more than stone. It was her last word if it came to that. A voice drifted through the trees, English, twisted through a slur thick with whiskey and old grudges. Laughter followed. She felt Mato shift beside her, the muscles in his back tightening like drawn wire. Then came silence. A silence so sharp it carved through the brush, sharper than the wind that never stopped its hunger. One rider slipped forward, his boots scraping rock as he dismounted. He moved like he owned the ground, the rifle across his shoulder, hanging loose and easy. Sorella couldn't see his face, but she knew the shape of him, the arrogance coiled in every step, The taste of violence he carried like a second skin dot. Another figure rose behind him, smaller, shuffling. A boy, maybe 15, his coat too big. His eyes darting everywhere except at the people he'd come to corner. His hands trembled around the old revolver strapped to his belt. Mato's breath caught the faintest sound. Sorella pressed her hand to his shoulder, felt him ease a fraction. The boy was too young, too green. Maybe they could send him running. Before the killing started, the lead rider stopped at the rim. His boots crunched frost as he peered down into the hollow. Sorella didn't dare move. She could smell his horse sweat and lather hear the animal's bridle jingle as it pawed the snow. "Well, look at this," the man drawled. "Thought you'd crawl deeper than this, Nate. But you're still just rats in a ditch, huh?" Nate. She tasted the name like old blood. Mato, the name she'd learned from the elder, from the way the people here spoke it with respect. The name that meant bear. But before that, before her, he'd carried the other name, the one men like this spat when they wanted to spit on something they feared. Mata didn't answer. He shifted his weight, sighting down the rifle's barrel. Sorella felt Alba stir, a small whimper that she smothered with her palm, her heart thundering like hoofbeats in her chest. Another voice joined the first, harsher. "Bring the girl out." The one with the whelp. Sorella's pulse leapt. She pressed deeper into the snow, the cold biting through her coat. Mato's hand found hers, squeezed once, then dropped away as he shifted to better brace the rifle. "Come get her," Mato called, voice like gravel dragged across a blade. The laughter came again, meaner this time. A boot scuffed rock then. Another. She saw shadows splitting apart 3, 5, maybe more. She didn't count. She didn't have to. They always brought enough to make sure no one crawled away whole. A low whistle cut through the hush. Then the crack of a branch snapping under a careless boot. The hunter beside Sorella loosed his arrow. It flew with a hiss, struck something that screamed and fell. Everything splintered at once. The hollow erupted in noise, hooves skittering. Men shouting, the sharp bark of rifles snapping the night wide open. Mato fired once, the shot punching the air so hard Sorella flinched. She pressed her cheek to Alba's head, rocking just enough to keep the baby's cry from breaking free. Shapes tumbled into the hollow, boots sliding on rock slick with snow. The boy, too young, too thin, tried to fire. The gun went off, a bright flash that missed everyone and hit the sky instead. He stumbled backward, eyes wide. Sorella saw Mato's rifle shift just enough to warn him. The boy dropped the gun. He bolted, vanishing into the dark like a promise half spoken and half kept. The others weren't so quick. One man lunged for the brush line, a knife in his hand. Teeth bared like a dog's. He never made it. Mato's shot took him low in the ribs, dropping him in a rush of steam and curse words. A rider tried to circle in, horse slipping on the ravine's edge. The animal screamed, reared, then vanished in a tangle of flailing legs and cracking branches. Sorella felt her stomach twist at the sound but didn't look. Couldn't look. A boot crunched near her ear too close. She jerked sideways just as a hand swept through the brush, grabbing at her hood. The flint blade was in her hand before she knew it, the edge gleaming once before it met flesh. A hiss. A grunt. The hand vanished, leaving a trail of dark warmth. On her sleeve, she pressed back into the snow, Alba's weight now an anchor and a shield. She didn't hear Mato's next shot, but she felt it like the air itself cracked in two. A shape fell at the rim, tumbling down the rocks until it lay still, and then, as fast as it began, the hollow went still. The echoes of rifles and hooves faded into the trees. The wind returned, dragging the smell of blood and gunpowder with it. Sorella looked up. Mato was there, crouched at the rim, scanning the brush. His eyes found hers, wide and sharp, the way a wolf looks when it knows the pack is safe for now. She shifted Alba, felt the baby's warm breath, the tiny fists pressed tight to her chest. She wanted to weep. She wanted to scream. Instead, she dragged the back of her hand across her mouth. Tasting iron and ash. The elder's voice rose behind them, calling to the hunters to check the dead, to gather the wounded before the cold took what the bullets hadn't. Mato stumbled down to her, boots slipping on frozen rock. He knelt, pressed his forehead to hers. His breath smelled of wood smoke and fear burned clean. "You did it," she said, voice raw. He shook his head. "We did it." Alba made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and Sorella wrapped her free arm around Mato's neck, pulling him close. They stayed like that while the hollow settled around them, while the wind rattled the branches overhead like bones, promising more trouble just beyond the rim of this small, blood-slicked piece of earth. They refused to surrender. When the elders' shadow fell over them, he did not speak. He only touched Mato's shoulder once, then nodded to Sorella, eyes bright, mouth a thin line that might have been a smile if you looked at it sideways. They would bury the bodies come dawn. They would bind their wounds, count their arrows, ration what bullets they had left. And then they would move again, because that was the truth of this land. It never stopped trying to swallow you. But sometimes, if you were fierce enough, if you stood your ground with teeth bared and a child's heartbeat pressed to your chest, it choked on the taste of you instead. At dawn, the hollow smelled of spent gunpowder and pine sap cracked open by boots and hooves. Sorella stood near the rim, cradling Alba close under her coat as the wind worried the ends of her hair loose from her braids. She could still feel the tremble in her wrists from the fight, though her grip on the flint blade never faltered. Below her, the hunters moved through the bodies like ghosts sorting bones. They worked quiet, mouths set, eyes sharp for any twitch that might mean one of the painted horsemen still drew breath. When they found the boy's dropped revolver half buried by a drift, they didn't speak, just passed it hand to hand before slipping it into a blanket bundle of salvage, a half-empty pouch of powder, a coil of rope, 3 cartridges that would mean the difference between life and none. Mato limped along the hollow's edge, stopping every few paces to brace his hand against the rock. His wound bled again, just enough to stain the bandage the elder had changed before dawn. But he said nothing, and so did she. The elder squatted near the creek's thin trickle, using the butt of his stick to push loose snow aside. He spoke to the hunters in words that slipped between Lakota and English and the wind's own hush. Sorella couldn't catch all of it, but she heard the shape of it. Bury deep. Mark the ground so it remembers, when the dead were stacked in shallow graves lined with branches. She watched the young ones cover the mounds with fresh snow. Their feet packed it tight, hiding the dirt that would thaw to bones come spring. She wondered if the painted horsemen would come back for these, or if they'd drift on like wolves, sniffing other trails. She hoped they would. Better to see them coming than to wake with cold steel against her throat. They moved again that afternoon, slipping from the hollow like water poured through a sieve. The travois scraped rock and brush, sled runners squealing when they struck hidden stones. Sorella stayed near Mato's side, though each time she tried to take his weight, he shrugged her off, teeth bared in that quiet way that said, "I'm not gone yet." Alba squirmed once under the sling, fussed at the cold air, then settled when Sorella pressed her palm flat to the baby's back. That steady heartbeat was the only thing that felt warm enough to banish the frost that clung to her mind. By dusk, they found a stand of old pines where the wind broke before it reached the ground. The hunters circled out, blades drawn, eyes sharp for any tracks. The elder sat on a stump near the fire, warming his stick over the embers, like it needed to remember its purpose. Mato lowered himself to a log with a hiss of breath. Sorella dropped beside him, pressing her shoulder against his. She could feel the tremor in him, small, buried deep. "But there, rest," she said. He grunted. "If I rest, you watch the shadows alone." She snorted, curling her fingers in his sleeve. "I've done worse." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. "I know." They stayed like that while the fire guttered low. Across the clearing, she saw the elder's eyes on them, watchful, not unkind. He would never say it, but she knew he wondered how much longer. They could keep outrunning men who were born with blood under their nails and ice in their bellies. So awoke before dawn, the taste of smoke still thick on her tongue. Mato's arm lay heavy over her waist, his breath warm in the hollow of her neck. Alba was wedged between them, small hands splayed across Sorella's chest like roots clutching soil. She slipped free, moving slow to keep them sleeping. The fire had gone to ash. Beyond the ring of brush, she saw two of the boys on watchbows in hand, spears jammed into the snow at their feet. They nodded when she passed, eyes darting past her to the trees, always searching for that shape that shouldn't be there. She found the elder near the pine line, his stick tapping the frozen ground in a rhythm that sounded like a question. He didn't look at her when she stopped behind him. "They're not done," she said. He grunted. "No snake forgets the hand that tries to cut its head. They'll find us again." The elder turned, eyes catching hers in the half-light. "So you keep your blade sharp." She felt the flint tucked into her belt, the edge worn smooth against her hip. She pressed her palm over it, felt her heartbeat there too. "They'll come." "For her first," she said, voice low. The elder's mouth curved, not a smile, not quite. "Then you let them learn that her mother bites harder than any winter." He left her there, his stick leaving a faint trail in the snow that the wind quickly swallowed. By noon, they were moving again westward, always westward, into hills so old they looked like the bones of something half buried by time. The path narrowed, funneled between cliffs that rose like broken teeth. Each echo of a footstep made Sorella flinch, waiting for it to be more than just her own noise. Mato stumbled once on a loose stone. She caught him under the arm, felt the grunt of pain rumble through his ribs. He tried to shrug her off. She didn't. "Let him. You'd carry me if it were me down," she said. He didn't argue after that. The sky turned gray before dusk, clouds stitched tight with the promise of more snow. The hunters found a shallow cave at the base of a split bluff, its mouth half hidden by scrub that rattled when the wind cut through. It wasn't much shelter, but it was enough. They squeezed inside. Bodies pressed so close Sorella could feel the heartbeat of the girl sleeping behind her. Alba woke twice, tiny cries echoing against the stone until Sorella's humming smoothed her back to sleep. Mato dozed beside her. One arm curled around Alba's back, the other draped across Sorella's hip. His face looked older in the flicker of the hidden coals lines carved deeper by every mile, every fight they'd survived. She didn't sleep. She lay awake, watching the shadows shift across the cave wall. Each breath felt like a bargain. One more day, one more step. One more storm that wouldn't take us out. When Alba sighed and burrowed closer, Sorella let her palm drift to the baby's hair. She bent close, her voice a hush meant only for her daughter's ear. "You will not bend, you will not break." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the scrub like bones knocking together. Sorella laid her free hand on Mato's chest, felt the stubborn drum of his heart beneath her fingertips. If the painted horsemen came again, they would find her standing. And they would find the cost had risen since the last time they tried to take what was hers. That would have to be enough. The next morning broke in fits of wind and ice. They rose from the cave like spirits crawling from old graves, stiff-limbed, red-eyed, and silent as the dawn. Sorella felt every bruise, every pull of skin that hadn't fully healed. But she carried Alba tight against her chest. The baby's heartbeat, a steady knock that told her to keep walking, even when her feet begged to stop. Mato stayed at her side, one arm bandaged against his ribs, the other gripping the stock of his rifle, like it was the last true thing in a world that never kept its promises. He did not complain when the path narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for 2 feet to stand. He only grunted when his wound tugged, leaning into her shoulder just enough to remind them both that they were still alive. Behind them, the line of hunters moved with the quiet ease of men who had learned that noise invited bullets. The elder brought up the rear, his stick clicking against stone. Each tap echoed through the cut in the hills like a reminder, we are here. We are not gone. Yet, they reached the top of the ridge as the sun crawled behind a bank of clouds, so thick it seemed the world had forgotten how to be warm. Below them, a stretch of scrubland weighted broken brush and thorny weeds, drifted with old snow. Somewhere beyond that lay the open prairie. Somewhere beyond that lay a place Mato claimed would hold them safe if they could reach it before. The painted horsemen found their trail again. Sorella squinted into the wind. She saw no riders, no plumes of smoke, no shadows slipping through the brush, but that didn't ease the crawl beneath her skin. Trouble was never far. She'd learned that well enough the night she watched a wagon burn with her old name still written on its side. Motto shifted beside her. We move before dusk, the wind's with us. The elder nodded, lifting his stick as if blessing the horizon. Move fast, bleed slow. That's how we stay alive. They threaded down the far side of the ridge by noon. Alba fussed at the cold air, her tiny cries swallowed by the wind that stung Sorella's cheeks raw. She hummed the same lullaby she'd carried across every mile since Dry Creek, a tune made of fragments her mother once sang, a promise that had outlived the woman who gave it voice. When they stopped near a cluster of scrub to rest, Mato leaned against a fallen log, his breath shallow. Sorella pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the heat that shouldn't have been there. The elder noticed too. He squatted, frowning at the way Mato's shirt stuck to the bandage under his coat. Root poultice tonight, the elder said, or he won't stand come morning. Mato tried to speak, but Sorella silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. You rest, I watch. He made a rough sound, part laugh, part surrender. You always do. She knelt beside him, letting Alba nuzzle into the warmth between them. Keep your eyes open a while longer. When we find that place of yours, you can sleep all you want. Mato's hand brushed her jaw, calloused fingers lingering like an oath. When you stand, they break. They moved again at dusk, slipping between patches of bramble that caught at their hides and sled runners. A scout returned with word of tracks, fresh hoofprints pressed into the muddy edge of a creek 2 miles back. The painted horsemen had split, some drifting east, some west. Trying to box them in, the elder pulled Sorella aside when Mato's eyes closed for a moment too long. When they come again, he rasped, you do not run this time. Sorella looked at the baby at her breast, then at Mato slumped against the sled. I won't. Good. The elder tapped her heart with 2 fingers. This is your blade now, use it. They camped that night under a stand of cottonwoods that whispered like women gossiping secrets. Sorella sat cross-legged with Alba nestled in her lap. She watched Mato sleep, his face slack, lips parted as the fever clung to him like a jealous ghost. She didn't wake him when the hunters came back, breathless with word of shapes on the ridgeline. 5, maybe 6 riders, moving slow, searching for the scent of weakness. Sorella only pulled her coat tighter around Alba, pressing her palm to the flint blade hidden there. Let them come, she murmured. This time they'll find teeth waiting. Toward dawn, the wind shifted. Sorella felt it before the scouts did, a ripple in the hush, like the land drawing breath for something sharp. She slipped out from under Mato's arm, easing Alba into a sling that bound mother and child so close their hearts knocked together. The elder was waiting by the biggest cottonwood, a hand pressed to the bark as if listening for the earths. Answer, they're closer, she said. He didn't turn. They think you break if they push hard enough. Sorella's mouth twisted. Then they don't know what they chase. A flicker of something like pride crossed the old man's face. No, they don't. Behind them, the hunters readied bows, notching arrows tipped in fire-hardened bone. Sorella touched each one as they passed, a blessing that tasted of blood and smoke. Mato stirred, waking to find her standing with Alba against her chest, her eyes on the ridgeline that threatened to spill trouble down their throats. "Sorella," he started. She didn't wait for him to finish. She pressed her palm to his cheek, felt the sweat there, the fever that refused to break. "You gave me a blade," she said. "Now let me use it." He caught her wrist, fingers weak but warm. "Don't die for me." "I'm not dying," she said, voice like stone. "I'm showing them what it costs to come for what's mine." When the first hoofbeats cracked the hush, she didn't flinch. She shifted Alba's weight, felt the child's heartbeat settle under her ribs like the drum that would carry them west. Then she stepped forward, boots crunching the frost that couldn't swallow her. And this time, when the wind howled through the cottonwoods, it sounded like a promise made in a tongue older than any man who thought he could take what a mother chose to keep. The first rider broke through the scrub at dawn's sharp edge, horse snorting steam into the pale blue hush. Sorella saw him before he saw her, his shoulders hunched against the cold, rifle balanced on his thigh like a promise yet to be kept. She felt Alba shift against her ribs, warm and small and impossibly real in a world that was about to splinter again. She didn't duck. She didn't flinch. She only pressed her lips to her daughter's hair, then stepped back into the shadows. Beneath the oldest cottonwood, the elder's voice drifted to her in the hush, low and steady, weaving through the whisper of the hunters slipping into place among the brush. Mato lay propped against a log 20 paces behind her. His eyes glinted, fever bright, watching the ridge. The rifle rested across his lap, muzzle aimed at the place where the trail bent low, where the painted horsemen would funnel through if they chose to finish what they'd started. The hoofbeats multiplied. Sorella counted them the way she'd once counted the days since Dry Creek, softly, under her breath, like a prayer with no saints to hear it. 3, 5, 6. Enough to crush a half-starved band of wanderers if they weren't ready. The lead horse stamped and snorted at the edge of the clearing. The man on its back leaned forward, scanning the tree line. His mouth cracked in a grin when he spotted Mato's shape by the fire. He shouted something behind him, words that snapped like whips, and the others fanned out, rifles glinting in the half-light. Sorella's fingers brushed the flint blade at her hip. She felt the old edge of terror slide along her ribs, but did not let it settle. She had learned to stand in its shadow and feel nothing but the drum of her child's heartbeat. Against her breast, one of the painted horsemen nudged his horse forward. "Nate," he called, using Mato's old name like a curse. "Got your woman?" The first rider broke through the scrub at dawn's sharp edge, horse snorting steam into the pale blue hush. Sorella saw him before he saw her, his shoulders hunched against the cold, rifle balanced on his thigh like a promise yet to be kept. She felt Alba shift against her ribs, warm and small and impossibly real in a world that was about to splinter again. She didn't duck. She didn't flinch. She only pressed her lips to her daughter's hair, then stepped back into the shadows. Beneath the oldest cottonwood, the elder's voice drifted to her in the hush, low and steady, weaving through the whisper of the hunters slipping into place among the brush. Mato lay propped against a log 20 paces behind her. His eyes glinted, fever bright, watching the ridge. The rifle rested across his lap, muzzle aimed at the place where the trail bent low, where the painted horsemen would funnel through if they chose to finish what they'd started. The hoofbeats multiplied. Sorella counted them the way she'd once counted the days since Dry Creek, softly, under her breath, like a prayer with no saints to hear it. 3, 5, 6. Enough to crush a half-starved band of wanderers if they weren't ready. The lead horse stamped and snorted at the edge of the clearing. The man on its back leaned forward, scanning the tree line. His mouth cracked in a grin when he spotted Mato's shape by the fire. He shouted something behind him, words that snapped like whips, and the others fanned out, rifles glinting in the half-light. Sorella's fingers brushed the flint blade at her hip. She felt the old edge of terror slide along her ribs, but did not let it settle. She had learned to stand in its shadow and feel nothing but the drum of her child's heartbeat. Against her breast, one of the painted horsemen nudged his horse forward. "Nate," he called, using Mato's old name like a curse. "Got your woman? Got your brat? Bring them out now, and maybe we leave you breathing." Mato's reply was a low growl, half choked by pain. "Come take them," the man spat. He glanced to his left, missed the flicker of movement in the brush behind him. Missed the boy crouched low with a bowstring pulled so tight it shivered in the cold. Missed Sorella's eyes watching every twitch of his hands. "Don't be stupid, Nate," the rider snarled. "We break you, we break her. The brat goes to the rail." Lines fattened up for some old man's bed. Sorella's breath hitched. She felt Alba stir, fussing at the hard press of her mother's arms. She pressed her lips to the baby's head. "Not you," she whispered. "Never you." The rider turned, scanning the line of trees. His eyes caught hers, a flash of recognition and something sharper, meaner. He started to lift his rifle. Sorella stepped out before he could aim. The flint blade flashed, but it wasn't the blade. That made the hunter's arrow sing. The bowstring snapped. The arrow took the rider just below the collarbone, spinning him backward off his saddle with a startled gasp that never turned into words. The clearing erupted. Hooves tore at the frost-bitten. Ground gunfire cracked and echoed through the cottonwoods. Sorella dropped to one knee, pressing Alba close, her eyes locked on the shapes that lunged and stumbled through the swirling snow. Mato's rifle barked once. Twice each shot a small piece of him that he gave willingly to hold the line. One painted horseman slid from his horse, boot catching in a stirrup, dragging him in a spray of blood and dirt. Another scrambled to reload, cursing, before a hunter's blade found his spine. A shape broke through the brush to Sorella's left one. Of the painted horse boys, no older than 16, eyes wide with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. He saw her. Saw Alba. He raised his pistol, hand trembling. Sorella rose from the snow like a storm-given form. The flint blade caught the light as it arced, buried itself in the boy's throat before the shot could clear the chamber. She wrenched it free, felt the warmth splash her knuckles. The boy fell without a word. She didn't look away. By the time dusk laid its bruised hand across the scrub, the clearing had fallen to a hush so deep it tasted like sleep. But Sorella knew better than to trust quiet. Quiet was a lie. She'd learned that under wagons where children clutched their father's boots and waited for fire to finish what men had started. Mato drifted in and out by the fire, his head propped on her rolled coat. She could hear the wet rasp of his breath when the wind dropped low enough to let it reach her. Each exhale was a victory. Each inhale a promise he might see dawn again. Alba dozed wrapped in a fur at Sorella's chest. Her tiny fingers curled. Tight, a fist pressed into her mother's breastbone as if she knew that heartbeat was hers to claim. The elder sat across the fire, eyes shut, lips moving around words older than the blood that stained the snow behind them. The hunters spread out in a ragged circle, fixing traps, brushing out tracks that would lead any wandering painted horseman to believe the land had swallowed these survivors whole. When Mato stirred, his eyes cracked open. Sorella leaned over. Him brushed sweat-dab hair from his forehead. "Still here," he rasped. "Still here," she echoed. He tried to smile. It looked more like a grimace, but she let him have it. "You," he said, voice breaking around the word. "You ... stood." She lifted Alba's warm weight so he could see the baby's sleepy face. "We stand." His eyelids fluttered, but didn't close. She didn't know if that was strength or fear of missing one more moment. She bent to kiss his brow. "Rest, you've earned it." He snorted, the ghost of a laugh. "Rest later." Too much ... left to do. Behind her, the elder's stick tapped the frozen ground 3 times, a signal to the hunters to close the line. Sorella turned her head, watching the shapes slide into place. Like shadows the fire couldn't banish. These men had fought beside Mato when he first came to them bloody and broken, half ghost and half promise. They would fight again. For him. For her. For Alba. Sorella shifted back onto her heels, letting Mato's hand slip from hers. She stood slowly, feeling the pull in her shoulders where exhaustion settled like an unwelcome lover. The elder rose with her, his stick scraping a line in the dirt. He spoke so low only she could hear. Another storm will come. Let it, she said. He watched her for a heartbeat longer, then nodded once, sharp and final, like the snap of a bone that healed stronger than before. They moved again before moonrise, slipping through scrub that clawed at their boots and the hides draped over the sleds. Sorella carried Alba high on her chest so she could feel every shiver, every breath, every tiny complaint the baby made against the wind that refused to die. Mato leaned on two hunters, one on each side. He cursed under his breath when the slope turned too steep or the rocks slipped beneath his boots. But he did not stop. She saw it in his eyes when he looked at her. We finish this together or not at all. They reached a bend in the creek bed at first light, where the trees grew tight, enough to hide smoke if they needed it. The hunters fanned out, laying snares, brushing fresh tracks with pine boughs. Sorella settled Mato near an old trunk hollowed by rot, folding her coat under his head. He coughed, blood wetting his lip. She wiped it away, her thumb trembling only when he looked away. You remember, he said, voice so low she had to bend close. When we find the high ground. You bury me where the sun can see. You'll stand there beside me, she snapped. The sharpness cut her tongue but tasted honest. You'll hold her up when she takes her first steps. His hand drifted to Alba's hair, brushing the down soft wisps at her temple. She run fast. She run free, Sorella said. No man's hands. No man's fire. He sighed, a ghost of what might have been laughter. Good. The elder called for her then, a single word that carried more weight than a gunshot. She laid Mato's hand over Alba's back, rose, and followed. The hunters had gathered by the water's edge. They had a boy pinned to the snow barely more than 15, cheeks cracked from cold, eyes wide and rolling like a skittish foal's. Found him trailing the sled, one said. Too young for painted horse. The elder's stick pressed to the boy's throat, not enough to break skin, just enough to remind him how thin the line was between living and not. Where's your kin? The elder asked. The boy's eyes flicked to Sorella, saw the blood on her coat, the blade she didn't bother to hide. He flinched but didn't speak. We should leave him, one hunter said. He'll die by dawn. Sorella looked down at the boy's hands raw, shaking, blue around the knuckles. Or he'll find his way back to those who ride after us. She knelt, close enough that her breath frosted his cheek. You've got two roads, boy. Pick one. He swallowed, throat bobbing against the elder's stick. No family, took my sister. North Rail Camp. Sorella's gut twisted. She'd heard those camps. Known what happened in the shadows behind the stockades. You run with them now? She asked. The boy's eyes filled, then narrowed. Run behind. Take what they drop. The elder's stick lifted an inch. Will you bleed us? The boy shivered. No, I can show you the wash they use, where they sleep when they're too drunk to ride. The hunters shifted, hungry for that edge. Sorella glanced at the elder. He didn't have to. Then you come, she said. You run with us now. They left the creek bed at dusk. The boy Tomas, he called himself, walked ahead, shoulders hunched under a hide twice too big. He didn't look back. Sorella followed, her boots sliding through drifts, crusted with blood and mud and the frozen promise of more trouble. Mata watched her as they moved. His eyes never left hers when the path narrowed to a ribbon of packed dirt and the wind began its old song through the branches overhead. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They all knew the next crossing would cost them dearly. And they all knew they'd pay it, one heartbeat at a time, to keep what was theirs standing in the thaw that waited on the other side of this bitter trail. The elder tapped his stick against the earth, 3 times steady as a drum dot, and they walked on. The next stretch of land gave them nothing, no cover, but scrub that scratched at their boots. No shelter, but the hollow of their own shadows leaning long across the frost-bitten dirt. Sorella walked with Alba's small weight pressed close to her heart, the baby's warmth a fragile fire that steadied her bones when the wind threatened to slip its fingers under her skin. Behind her, Mato stumbled once, then twice, his boots dragging furrows through the drift. Each time he caught himself, she heard the growl in his throat, as if his body was daring him to stand or die trying. The hunters flanked him, silent, eyes always on the horizon where trouble waited like a wolf that had learned to stalk them. By scent alone, Doc Tomas, the boy, led them toward the river bend, a low cut through the land where the painted horsemen sometimes camped when whiskey turned their legs soft and careless. He didn't look back much, but when he did, Sorella saw it in his eyes, the hope that this was the road that might not end. With his bones scattered for crows, they reached the bend at dusk. No smoke, no fresh tracks. The hunters fanned out, blades flashing once when the last light slipped behind the hills. They found old coals half buried under drift, boot prints half frozen but stale. The enemy had moved on, but not far. The taste of them lingered in the air, sharp and coppery. The elder tapped his stick against a tree root, the sound like a heartbeat counting down the moments until the next fight. We sleep here. Sorella crouched near Mato, where the old roots curved like ribs around a shallow fire. She pulled off her mittens to press the back of her hand to his brow. Too hot, too long like this, and the wound would rot him from the inside. Out before a bullet could finish what the painted horsemen started. He cracked his eyes open, voice low. "You're cold." She snorted, rolling her shoulders so Alba nestled tighter under her coat. Not enough to break. He tried to smile, but it slid off his face like melting snow. Good. Tomas drifted near the fire's edge, his stick stirring the coals, eyes darting between the hunters and the darkness beyond the river's bend. "They'll come by dawn," he said, voice rough. "Always do, sober enough by then to hold a rifle steady." The elder's gaze slid to Sorella, no question in it. Only a truth she'd already tasted enough times to know by heart. Stand ready. Bleed slow, break them first. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did the baby, not fully. Alba fussed and fretted under the covers, fists kneading at Sorella's collarbone like she could feel her mother's bones locked against the threat. That stalked them just out of sight. Mato's breath rasped in shallow pulls. Sometimes he murmured her name. Once he said Sarah, and the sound made her chest twist. Sarah was the name he'd carried in the old stories, the one they'd said he'd failed when the world turned its teeth on him the first time. Sorella bent low, pressing her lips to his ear. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I won't be buried for you. We stand together." She felt the tremor in his chest, the soft grunt that might have been agreement, or might have just been the body's last rebellion against giving up. Before dawn, Tomas nudged her awake, though she hadn't slept. His face was pale as old ash, his teeth worrying his lip until it bled. "They're close," he whispered. "2 scouts, south side of the bend." I saw their breath. Sorella didn't ask how he'd slipped so close to them and come back without a bullet between his eyes. Some boys were born to live like ghosts until they chose otherwise. She shifted Alba deeper into the sling, the baby's tiny cry muffled by the thump of her mother's heartbeat. Then she touched Mato's cheek once, the skin clammy under her palm. "Stay." The elder motioned her forward. Together they crouched at the river's edge where the brush knotted tight enough to catch an unsuspecting man by the ankle and hold him. There long enough for a blade to find its place. They waited, breath frosting the air, the hush so heavy it smothered even the wind. Sorella felt the flint blade warm against her hip, the weight of it an old friend, now one that had eaten men's voices when they tried to make hers small. the first painted. Horse Scout stepped through the brush like he owned the earth under his boots. His rifle hung loose in one hand, his eyes still thick with whiskey's sleep. The elder's stick flicked a sign. Sorella didn't hesitate. She lunged, blade flashing once before the man could lift his weapon. His grunt shuddered the hush. Apart, he fell at her feet, breath leaking out through the hole she'd made beneath his chin. The second man shouted. An arrow answered him, one of the hunter's shafts striking home below the ribs. He stumbled backward, mouth working around words that never made it out. His boots thumped twice, then were still. Sorella wiped her blade on the scout's coat. She did not look away. The elder's voice rumbled beside her, words low and iron strong. Keep them scared. Wolves run when you show teeth. When the sun rose, the camp was already moving. Mato half walked, half staggered with Tomas bracing his good side. Alba pressed her face into Sorella's throat, her soft breath a promise that one day this child would run these same hills without looking over her shoulder for men, whose hands knew only how to take. They crossed the river at a shallow bend where the ice cracked under boots, but held long enough to bear their weight. The cold bit deep, numbed the bruises that made each step a reminder of what they'd given to stand this long. Beyond the far bank, the land opened wide low hills rolling west like a promise half-spoken. Somewhere past them lay the place Mata had whispered about when his fever was low enough for dreams, a stretch of land where the grass grew tall, the water sweet, the wind too open for devils to hide in. Sorella looked back only once. The river bent behind them, its banks littered with tracks and frozen ghosts. She pressed her palm to Alba's back, her thumb tracing the curve of her daughter's spine. We keep moving, she murmured. Mato's hand found hers, rough and trembling but strong enough to squeeze. West, he said. She glanced at Tomas. The boy's shoulders squared against the wind, eyes already fixed on the horizon. West, she echoed, and they did not stop. The first mile beyond the river tasted of hope turned brittle by the cold. The scrub thinned to rolling hills, crusted with frost, each ridge holding the ghost of a promise Mato had painted in Sorella's ear on nights when fear pressed closest. A place too wide for shadows to hide, he'd said. A place where no man's boots could corner them again. But hope, she'd learned, was a thread that frayed quickest when you pulled it too tight. Mato's steps dragged more than before. Tomas walked close at his side, a boy pretending to be a man, eyes flicking to the slope ahead as if he could will the land to flatten for them. The hunters circled out, one scout vanishing into a line of bare trees that knifed through the open ground like ribs, cracked by old wounds. Alba slept tucked beneath Sorella's coat. The weight of her was an anchor and a star, both pulling Sorella down and holding her up in the same breath. She shifted the sling to keep the baby's face warm when the wind changed, dragging the smell that made her stomach knot. Wood smoke, faint but fresh. She tapped Tomas's shoulder. Riders? He sniffed. The wind, eyes narrowing. Campfire, small, could be settlers. Could be the tail end of Painted Horse. The elder caught up, his stick tapping the frozen dirt. We go wide, Mato grunted, or we see who it is. If they're moving west, we walk together for a time. Sorella didn't answer right away. She felt the shiver in Mato's voice, the way he bit down on his breath when the slope pulled too much at the wound beneath his ribs. He would not last another run if they were wrong. Wide, she said. If they mean trouble, we keep our backs to them. The elder nodded once, his eyes catching hers in a look that needed no words. No more graves today if we can help it. They cut left, following the bend of a shallow ravine that funneled the wind into a voice that seemed to whisper all the things they dared not speak. Tomas broke trail, light on his feet, a shadow too young to be carrying the ghosts he did. When they paused to drink from a half-frozen stream, he crouched beside Sorella, eyes on Alba's sleeping face. She'll never know, he said softly. What it cost. Sorella's lips twitched, not quite a smile. That's the point. Tomas wiped a smear of mud from his sleeve, voice rough. I'd take their place if I could. No, she said. You'll take a place beside her. When she runs, you'll keep the wolves from her heels. He looked at her then, and for a heartbeat, she saw the boy he might have been if the world hadn't. Cracked him open so soon. He nodded, eyes flaring with something that looked too much like faith. When night fell, the wind picked up, carrying flakes of old snow that stung the skin and melted into the soft creases behind her ears. They found shelter under an overhang of rock where dry grass pressed flat by some passing herd made a poor bed. But better than none. Mato collapsed more than lay down. Sorella eased him onto her rolled cloak, pressing her palm to his chest to feel the hammer of his heart, still stubborn, still there. His lips were cracked, words catching in his throat like fish trapped under ice. When we find it ... He rasped. You'll see it, she said. He laughed, a raw scrape that left him coughing. If not ... bury me where the sky can find me. I won't bury you, she snapped. Not yet. He grabbed her wrist, his grip stronger than it had any right to be. You stand, even when I fall. Promise me. She wanted to lie, to tell him she would follow him into the dark if he slipped there. But Alba stirred under her coat, her small hands curling at Sorella's collarbone. I promise, she said. But you don't get to make it easy for me. He let her go then, head tipping back to the rock. His eyes drifted shut, lashes crusted with frost. The elder settled near the opening, his stick wedged across the mouth of the shelter as if it could hold back everything that stalked them. No sign they followed? Sorella asked. The old man's eyes glinted under his hood. They follow always, until they can't. She wanted to ask if he meant the painted horsemen, or the ghosts that clung to them like burrs in a winter coat. But the answer was the same either way. Dawn came pale and brittle. Matu didn't wake at first. His chest rose shallow, each breath a question she was too afraid to answer. She forced water into his mouth, humming the old wagon tune under her breath when his eyes fluttered open. West, he breathed. West, she answered. They walked before the sun cleared the ridge. Tomas carried the rifle now. Mato leaned on Sorella, his weight a dead thing when he slipped, but still he refused to stop. They reached the crest by midday. Beyond it, the land unfurled a sweep of prairie dappled with frozen grass, the ribs of old trees marking the shape of a dry creek that might wake come spring. It looked like nothing. It looked like salvation. Sorella let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. She pressed her palm to Mato's back, felt the rattle there, and knew it wouldn't hold much longer. There, he rasped, his voice a thread. Our place. Tomas flanked them, eyes scanning the rim of the horizon. He saw nothing but wind and distance. For once, that was enough. Sorell, lowered Alba to the ground for the first time since the fight. By the river bend. The baby kicked her tiny feet against the grass, soft coos bubbling from her lips. See it? Sorella whispered, crouching low so their foreheads touched. This is yours. No fire, no iron, no man's hand to tear it away. Behind her, Mato's breath caught. When she looked back, his eyes were open clear for a moment. He saw Alba. He saw the land. He saw her. He smiled. And then he closed his eyes. The elder laid a hand on her shoulder. Tomas stood guard, rifle balanced across his chest. The hunters began to spread out, marking lines in the snow that would one day become fences or footpaths, boundaries to hold a promise no wind could carry away. Sorella lifted Alba high, her arms trembling not with weakness but with the weight of everything she refused to lay down. The prairie wind caught her hair, whipping it around the baby's tiny fists. Ours, she said, always. And the wind answered with its hush, sweeping west, carrying the last ghost of their fear beyond the bend where they would never follow again. They laid him to rest at the highest point where the prairie dipped just enough to cradle a man who'd carved his place out of all that wanted to swallow him. Sorella pressed her palm to the mound they built of dry earth and stone, her fingers trembling only when Alba's tiny hand curled around her wrist, anchoring her to a world that refused to stop spinning. The elder stood to her right, his stick driven deep into the frost-bitten dirt, marking the grave not as a place of sorrow, but as a boundary, a line that said, "Here he rests. Here we stand." Tomas waited near the rise, his eyes on the stretch of land that unfurled into forever. The boy's shadow fell long across the snow, lean shoulders squared as if daring anything that still hunted them to show its teeth one last time. When the wind kicked up, Sorella pulled her coat tighter around Alba's small warmth, the child's breath of feather against her neck. Mato's voice echoed in the hush between gusts, words he'd spoken over a splintering campfire, over the last of the whiskey they'd bartered for salt and bullets. When you stand, they break. She stood now. Not for him alone, but for the promise they'd forged in blood and hunger and the hush of a newborn's first cry. The hunters fanned out, moving through the grass that whispered like old ghosts finally given a place to sleep. They laid snares, traced paths that would one day carry hooves and boot heels, but would never again carry the men who'd tried to corner them. The painted horsemen were gone. Those that survived had melted back into the brush, their names carried on the wind. Like a warning, do not come for what will not bow. Sorella knelt by the grave as dusk gathered, itself in bruised shades of blue and gold. She pressed her lips to the stone at its head, tasting the grit there, the bite of cold that reminded her, this land gave nothing unless you took it with your teeth bared. "You brought us here," she whispered. "Now I keep it." Alba squirmed in her sling, small fists bumping her collarbone. The baby's eyes blinked open, blue as the dusk that swallowed the ridge. She fussed once, then fell silent, her breath fogging the air between them. Sorella rose, boots creaking in the crusted snow. Tomas joined her, his eyes catching hers before drifting to Alba. "She never run alone," he said. Not a question, a promise. Sorella managed a smile that felt carved from stone but true all the same. She won't have to. They moved to the ridge's edge together, the elder's figure just behind them, that stick tapping the ground in a rhythm that might have been a blessing or a warning or both that below. The prairie yawned wide ridges rolling like old scars, the dry creek splitting the grassland in two. Somewhere beyond it, spring waited. Green would come, softening the bones of this place, feeding roots that would bind them here stronger than any iron rail or sheriff's badge ever could. The wind shifted, brushing her hair across her cheeks, catching Alba's soft hum as the baby drifted back to sleep against her breast. Sorella lifted her chin, staring down that wind like she'd stared down every man who'd thought to bend her for his hunger. "There's your line," she said, voice low but clear. "Cross it, and you find teeth waiting." Tomas chuckled, dry and boyish. "Good, let them try." The elder's stick tapped once more, then stilled. "The land remembers," he said, his voice as thin as the last light slipping from the sky. "It remembers blood and bone and promise. Feed it right, it feeds you back." Sorella touched Alba's back, felt the steady pulse there, the tiny drum that beat out a future made in spite of all that had tried to crush it. "She feed it," Sorella said. She planted her feet deeper than any root. The hunters settled around them, making a circle that held no walls, but felt as strong as any fortress. A small fire crackled behind the stones they'd stacked to guard it from the wind. One by one, they unwrapped dry meat, boiled water scraped from snowmelt. Simple things that tasted like survival. Sorella stayed on the ridge until the stars cut through the clouds' cold pinpricks, so sharp they looked close enough to pluck. She traced one with her eyes, a line drawn west, always west. Beyond these hills, there would be more storms, More hands hungry for what was not theirs. More miles to lay down before the land called her blood its own. She lowered her gaze to Alba's sleep-pink cheek, then to Mato's stone, standing watch at the highest point of the rise. "You brought us this far," she said, voice a hush that found its echo in the prairie hush. "Now watch me do the rest." Behind her, Tomas's footsteps crunched close. He laid a hand on her shoulder, boy's grip turning into something iron-strung. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start the fence." "Tomorrow," she agreed. The elder's stick tapped the earth 3 times final, firm like a closing prayer dot, and the wind, greedy thing that it was, carried their promise west into the dark where no one would dare steal it again. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.